Hey guys, tonight we journey to a place you've never seen but can almost feel beneath your feet. A soggy ribbon of land where water meets sky and the story of an ancient city unfolds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and the current time in the comments so I know where and when this bedtime adventure finds you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a muddy riverbank, each step swallowing your sandal into the thick Yangtze silt. The air tastes of damp earth and distant rain. Fireflies drift like glowing spirits, tracing lazy loops above submerged reeds. Every so often you feel a soft whoosh beneath your toe, a hidden pocket of water claiming its prize. It's the kind of marsh that wants to remind you how small you are, so if you happen to sink past your knee, just laugh it off. After all, this is the raw stage where the story of Liangzhu begins. As dawn light filters through a gauzy mist, you notice that the river here doesn't simply meander. It brings cargo. Tons of fine, clay-rich sediment slip downstream with each cresting wave. This very silt built the foundation of a civilization 5,000 years ago. Archaeologists date the Liangzhu culture from about 3,300 to 2,300 BCE, meaning you're walking where artisans and farmers once laid down the first bricks of a Jade kingdom. Historians are still debating whether these raised platforms served mainly as flood defenses or as ceremonial terraces. But either way, you can't help but credit the ingenuity of moving so much earth with nothing but woven baskets and human backs. You press on until you spot neat lines of low earthen walls cutting across a field that still floods each spring. Imagine dozens of workers shoulder to shoulder, hoop skirts damp against their calves, scooping mud into wooden troughs. Then they'd wade out to place the load on a grid of poles to dry. That drying process could take days under a hot summer sun, and sometimes cracks formed, forcing the crew to start over. Yet somehow they persisted, stacking layer upon layer until a single platform rose above the floodplain like a modest hill. Modern surveys reveal some of these platforms reached heights of 3 meters, big enough to host rituals or shelter important buildings above the worst of the seasonal deluge. Your hand brushes against a shard of pottery jutting from the mud, a tiny clue to the daily life of Liangzhu's first settlers. They grew wild rice in shallow paddies, flooding fields at will, and then drained them with simple canals lined by timber stakes. Mainstream archaeological evidence shows their rice yields rivaled those of contemporaneous cultures in the Yellow River basin. Yet you pause to ponder an odd anecdote. Some of their early paddies were apparently fertilized with crushed snail shells, an obscure technique that modern soil scientists say would boost calcium and improve yields. Go figure, right? A distant crow caws as you follow a narrow channel that channels water away from the paddy to another embankment. You slip between reeds taller than your head, listening to the rush of water draining off the fields. You might think this is just primitive irrigation, but no, this was big-picture engineering, a network of levees, sluices, and dug canals that spanned more than 10 kilometers in some estimates. Liangzhu's hydraulic mastery may even predate the Grand Canal by millennia, though historians are still debating whether the system's primary aim was agriculture or ceremonial purification. Either way, you feel the ancient currents ripple beneath your sandals. Rain begins to patter gently on the broad leaves of wild taro, and you climb onto one of those earthen walls to get a better view. Beyond the mist you glimpse silhouettes of stilted structures, though you can't quite make out details yet. Somewhere in the distance, a worker strikes a chunk of jade with a hard stone tool, creating a sharp ring that echoes across the wet fields. It's hard to believe that the same muddy ground under your toes will one day yield enormous jade cong. Those iconic hollowed tubes carved with angular faces that scholars believe symbolized earth and sky. As you settle onto a raised sod bench, you wonder how many people it took to build this all. Estimates suggest Liangzhu's core settlement housed perhaps 5,000 residents at its peak. They lived in long wooden halls elevated above floodwaters, gathering to celebrate harvests or bury their dead with fine jade scepters. Yet the reality of daily life was far from glamorous. Mud clung to clothes, leeches feasted on ankles, and mosquitoes buzzed so fiercely you'd think they were auditioning for a chorus line. Still, the promise of abundant rice and the glow of a community carving jade treasures made even the toughest days worthwhile. You lean forward, tracing finger patterns in the mud that mimic the earliest proof of urban planning. Some embankments form right angles so precise they baffle modern surveyors. Others curve gently to follow shifting currents. It's a living map of adaptation, drawn by hands that understood this landscape better than any bureaucrat. And yet, a nagging question persists. Was this grid more about asserting control over nature or about inviting it to join in sacred festivals? Scholars haven't reached consensus. So as you stare at the lines, you half expect ghostly figures in loincloths to emerge, chanting hymns to the water lord. Night deepens and fireflies multiply, creating a living constellation around you. You step out of the mist-shrouded wetlands and onto a broad, flattened courtyard of packed earth, still damp from last night's seep and glinting softly in the early morning light. Beside you, low wooden scaffolds support heavy stone anvils, each scarred by countless hammer blows. A dozen artisans crouch around them, torchlight flickering against their tanned faces as they coax glowing embers of ambition out of the hardest stone you've ever touched, jade. The air smells of wet river mud and heated stone, with a faint mineral tang that puts your teeth on edge. You might want to wipe that taste away, but don't. This is the flavor of creation at its rawest. A faint ringing sound carries on the breeze, a clear, high-pitched tone that makes your spine tingle. Follow it, and you find young apprentices huddled around a shallow pit filled with coarse sand and water. Each holds a stout length of bamboo, its end wrapped in leather and studded with tiny chips of quartz. They press it against a jade slab, rotating it with slow, methodical precision. Minute jade dust blossoms like pale flower petals, swirling in the muddy water. You realize this is no simple chisel work. It's the ancestor of rotary drilling, a technique so advanced that it wouldn't reappear in Asia for another 2 millennia. Historians are still debating whether Liangzhu artisans pioneered this method independently or picked it up from long-distance visitors. But there's no question it transformed raw boulders into ritual objects of breathtaking beauty. You crouch beside the master carver, a broad-shouldered figure whose arms gleam with sweat. In his hands rests a partially carved by disc, a circular jade plate with a perfectly centered hole. He runs a finger along the smooth curve of its outer rim, and you can almost hear the soft scrape as his finger traces a path toward perfection. "Watch the rhythm," he murmurs, eyes fixed on a spot that seems invisible to you. The stone teaches you its own pace. You nod, though you suspect any misstep could shatter the entire piece. After all, jade's interlocking crystals make it nearly impossible to cut, and a slip of the drill bit can send hairline fractures racing across the form in an instant. Under the master's watchful gaze, you try your hand at guiding a bamboo drill. Heart pounding, you apply gentle pressure, letting the quartz grit do its work rather than brute force. The tip bites slowly, infinitesimal progress measured in microns rather than millimeters. Your hands tremble as jade dust floats like a fine mist, settling on your bare arms and clogging your nostrils. One miscalculation and you'll scar the disc's surface or crack the central hole. Failures that, by all rights, should discourage you. Yet there's something poetic in the struggle, a lesson that mastery often demands more patience than strength. Beyond the courtyard, you spot the brighter shapes of other jade forms awaiting their turn at the anvil. Cong, tall, hollowed cubes carved with stylized faces, stand like sentinels in neat rows. Each facet bears a carved mask motif, eyes staring outward in silent vigilance. Archaeological surveys indicate that some of these cong pieces weigh over 10 kilograms apiece, meaning every one required hours of collective labor. You imagine teams of 10 or more artisans sharing the wear of bamboo drills, passing the burins along in rhythmic unison. And yet, despite the communal exertion, each object feels uniquely personal, as if the carver infused a fragment of themselves into the jade's crystalline heart. Your gaze drifts upward to the sky, now clear and pale blue, and you notice glimmers of sunlight dancing on jade tools hung by leather thongs from wooden pegs. Those tools, chisels, abrasives, and drills, are themselves works of art, sometimes polished so finely that their handles gleam like onyx. A quirky detail you wouldn't find in every history book. Some handles were inlaid with small seashell fragments taken from coastal traders. These tiny mother-of-pearl bits shimmer in the torchlight, a subtle reminder of Liangzhu's vast trade networks. It's odd to picture a jade workshop dusted with saltwater shells, but that contrast of elements, stone and sea, seems perfectly in tune with the land's watery spirit. You rise and drift toward a long, low hut where dozens of finished jade pieces rest on reed mats. There, surrounded by the faint scent of burned pitch used to seal cracks, you see by discs of every size, from palm-sized tokens that might have been worn as amulets, to grand slabs wider than a drum. You pick up a medium-sized disc and marvel at the concentric grooves carved into its face. These grooves catch the light in rippling patterns, evoking the eddies and currents of the Yangtze itself. It's no accident. Mainstream scholars credit this iconography with symbolizing the river's life-giving flow, the very silt that built the city rising and receding like a heartbeat. A shiver runs down your spine as you imagine these discs serving as cosmic mirrors, portals to other realms, perhaps, or keys to ancestral gates. Some fringe theories even propose that the central hole represents a portal to the underworld, though most experts dismiss that as fanciful speculation. Historians are still debating this question, so you tuck it away as you wander onward, your footsteps muffled by the moist earth. In the center of the courtyard stands a massive slab of uncut jade, pale green marbled with darker veins. It dwarfs every artifact you've seen so far. A half-dozen overseers stand around it, marking it with chalk lines that trace the intended shape of an oversized cong. You edge closer, inhaling the cool, mineral scent of the massive stone. Someone whispers that this particular piece originated not in the local riverbeds but was quarried from glacial outcrops in what is today the far-off Kunlun Mountains, a trek of hundreds of miles by river and land. If true, it underscores the astounding lengths Liangzhu society went to procure the purest jade, a commodity so prized that entire expeditions might have been dispatched just to haul away a single boulder. Nearby, a pair of lookouts stand atop a low earthen platform, scanning the horizon. They clutch polished jade scepters, ceremonial staffs topped with stylized cloud motifs. You've read that in certain burial contexts, these scepters were carefully placed alongside the deceased, symbolizing power and divine favor. A mainstream view holds that such grave goods indicate clear social stratification within Liangzhu culture. Yet another theory argues that jade wasn't just about hierarchy but about communal identity, a shared cultural language encoded in stone. Historians remain divided on which interpretation captures the truth. The workshop air vibrates again with the sound of hammer on jade, but this time the rhythmic cadence reminds you of a heartbeat, steady, life-affirming. You step back to watch the final finishing touches, a gentle burnishing with leather strips dipped in fine sand, smoothing every edge until the surface gleams like water under moonlight. The master carver runs his hand across a finished cong, nods appreciatively, and lifts it high so that the morning sun refracts through its thin walls. It glows a translucent jade green, as if lit from within. Your own heart races with wonder. You've witnessed raw stone become something eternal, an object that will survive millennia buried beneath silt and rediscovered by future generations. And yet, for all the technical mastery on display, you sense a deeper purpose at work. These weren't simply tools of power or status tokens. They were bridges between earth and sky, humanity and spirit, crafted by hands that revered both the material and the mystical. A distant gong sounds, calling the artisans to a midday pause. You follow the sound to a raised veranda where long benches are piled with bowls of rice porridge, small fish and steamed vegetables. As you sit cross-legged, spoon in hand, you catch snippets of conversation. Someone marvels at a particularly clear jade they saw last night. Another frets over a tiny crack in a newly carved cong. Even now, centuries before hydraulic presses or rotary saws, these carvers cared deeply about precision. It strikes you as both amusing and profoundly human. No matter how advanced the technique, pride and ego still ride shotgun on creativity's journey. You bite into a chunk of fish and feel the oil-slick sweetness slide down your throat. A group of apprentices lounges under a woven canopy of palm fronds, joking that if they sneeze too hard while drilling, they'll blow the entire hole off-center. You laugh, though you know the risk is real. One misaligned groove and days of painstaking work vanish in an instant. Yet laughter persists here, a testament to the resilience of human spirit even under the pressure of perfection. As the sun climbs higher, the torch fires go out and the courtyard plunges into a hush broken only by the soft drip of jade dust-tinged water. You stand and wipe your palms on your trousers, your hands now streaked with a pale green patina. Slowly, you take a last look at the scattered jade pieces. Congs, bis, scepters, each a testament to the skill and devotion of Liangzhu's artisans. You realize you've witnessed more than the making of stone objects. You've glimpsed the heartbeat of a civilization, one that revered patience above all else. When you step away from the courtyard, jade dust still clinging to your boots, the marsh air cools around you. Somewhere ahead, the city's pulse. You push off from the muddy shoreline into a slender wooden boat, the polished hull slipping through emerald green water as your paddle parts ripples like a whisper. The early morning air tastes of damp reeds and cool mist, mingling with a distant echo of crow calls. At your elbow, the boat's prow bumps softly against a low earthen levee, the very same structure built centuries ago to tame the restless Yangtze's floods. In the flickering dawn light, you discern the faint outlines of a tangled network of canals, each carved with the precision of a master mapmaker's hand. Mainstream archaeological surveys confirm that Liangzhu's waterworks extended over more than 10 kilometers from end to end, a feat of civil engineering unseen elsewhere in the Neolithic world. You lean over the side and let your fingertips drag in the slow current, feeling both wonder and trepidation at the age-old force beneath your touch. A low staccato chorus of frogs rises from beneath sunken reeds, as if the marsh itself sings the story of human ambition. Somewhere beyond the mist, the distant shape of a platform mound hints at the city's heart, waiting for you to discover its secrets. This living labyrinth of earth and water shapes nearly every aspect of Liangzhu's ancient identity. You drift alongside an earthen embankment the height of a small man, its sides reinforced by stout wooden stakes driven into soft mud at precise intervals. These stakes were often carved with stylized fish motifs for reasons unknown, a quirky tradition that archaeologists say may have served as both structural support and spiritual decoration. At eye level you see notches cut into some timbers, marks indicating water depth, suggesting the builders used crude gauges to monitor seasonal floods. Surprisingly, some of these gauges were fashioned from turtle shells affixed to stakes, turning an everyday material into an ingenious measuring tool. Mainstream studies confirm that this measured approach allowed Liangzhu engineers to predict flooding and adjust sluice gates well before any modern sensor existed. Historians are still debating whether the primary function of these canals was strictly agricultural irrigation or also served a ceremonial purification role in water rituals. Beneath the surface, small fish dart between submerged reeds, helping to keep mosquitoes at bay in a serendipitous feedback loop. You press your palm against a mossy stake and feel centuries of damp seep into your clothing. This living engineering marvel blends utility and ritual in every grain of silt. You glance upriver and notice a T-shaped canal junction where water converges from two tributaries, merging with a gentle hiss that echoes off nearby platforms. Farmers guide narrow dugout canoes laden with bundles of harvested rice stalks, steering by pole through channels barely wider than the boat's length. Archaeological evidence indicates these canals doubled as transport arteries, carrying goods and people across the flooded plains with remarkable efficiency. You dip your hand into the chilly current, imagining how swiftly a bamboo raft could float a load of grain downstream to central storage platforms. Orange-shelled freshwater clams, an obscure delicacy, cling to submerged wooden planks, hinting at snack breaks for early settlers. The canal walls rise in neat parallel lines, only interrupted by periodic wooden footbridges spanning the water, their logs bound by hemp rope. An unexpected wind gust rattles overhead bamboo scaffolding, sending a shower of tassels into the canal like confetti celebrating water's return. You follow a narrow path of stepping stones placed just above the waterline, careful to avoid the slick green algae that coats each rock. In this place, water is both highway and lifeblood, channeling prosperity and possibility through every stroke. You round a gentle bend and come upon a sluice gate carved from massive timbers, its horizontal beam fitting snugly into a grooved frame that channels water with uncanny precision. Employing simple levers and counterweights, Workers raise and lower the gate stones to flood paddies, or to protect them from surging flows during high tide. Mainstream experts date the earliest sluice technology at Liangzhu to around 3000 BCE, making it one of the oldest known hydraulic controls in East Asia. In a hidden nook beneath the beam, you spot a small clay jar half buried in mud, likely used to collect rainwater samples for testing, a surprisingly sophisticated method predating formal experiments by millennia. As you lean closer, the gate's wooden teeth creak, reminding you that this system lives and breathes with the seasons. A pair of herons stands sentinel on a raised walkway above the water, eyed like silent engineers surveying their domain. You realize that each canal, each gate, forms part of an orchestra of stone, wood, and water, producing a mutable symphony dictated by sky and earth. The canal's bends, locks, and weirs guide the flow with playful intent, carving sinuous curves that echo the Yangtze's own meandering. Here, nature and human will entwine in a delicate balance. You step onto a bamboo raft lashed together with woven vines, its surface bobbing gently as you settle onto a low bench. Ahead, the canal widens into a shallow lagoon ringed by reed beds, where workers collect rushes for weaving mats and thatching roofs. An obscure but fascinating note: some villagers crushed snail shells into lime wash used on wooden structures, blending architectural necessity with unexpected culinary byproduct. You glide past a series of small terraces carved into the bank, each one supporting clusters of taro and water chestnut plants. The water reflects the sky like a massive mirror, scattering shards of cloud across your view. Mainstream archaeological surveys show that these flooded terraces may have been early versions of rice paddy rotation, maximizing yield by balancing soil nutrients. A cool breeze ruffles the surface, sending concentric ripples that lap against your raft's edge with soothing regularity. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle motion and rhythmic water movement lull you into a reflective silence. It feels like the canals are whispering secrets of resilience to anyone willing to listen. As you drift onward, you notice subtle differences in water clarity. Some channels shimmer with crystalline green hues, while others appear rich with suspended silt. To maintain flow, laborers dredged the bottoms with long poles tipped in bronze, their work sending pale sediment clouds swirling like ghost ships. You crouch at the rail to witness a worker's technique. Steady prods and rhythmic sweeps, each sweep guided by years of practiced motion. Off to your right, a sudden splash betrays a startled river turtle, slipping back into hiding beneath a fallen log. Scholars still dispute how often such dredging occurred, as limited sediment cores offer conflicting timelines for maintenance cycles. A single canal could require re-excavation every season or only once in several years, depending on flood severity and labor availability. You wonder how villagers balanced the urgency of harvest with the never-ending task of canal upkeep. Overhead, cicadas buzz in a lazy drone, punctuating the silence with reminders of summer's presence. In these rippled corridors, you glimpse the tireless collaboration between human ingenuity and natural forces. Further along, a grand canal sweeps open like the main artery of a living organism, its banks lined with towering earthen walls that look almost like natural cliffs. Built with alternating layers of packed mud and brushwood, these walls held back floodwaters while creating raised paths for porters carrying heavy loads. Mainstream research notes that this layered construction technique reduced slippage and erosion far more effectively than flat embankments. At one section, you find a cluster of pottery shard insulators, possibly used to shore up weak points. Porcelain fragments with intricate geometric patterns surprising in their sophistication. You run your fingers along the wavy edge of a broken shard, marveling at how art and engineering meld in a single vessel. Water gurgles through a narrow culvert beneath the embankment, its moss-lined interior glowing dark emerald under your lantern's beam. There's a hush here, save for the gentle drip of water and the distant call of a kingfisher. You imagine ancient overseers pacing these levee crowns, clipboard replaced by memory and instinct. This is hydraulic artistry at its purest, carved into the landscape itself. You spot a flight of stone steps leading down into a flooded chamber, its entrance partially submerged beneath a leaning sandstone lintel. Slipping off your sandals, you wade knee-deep into cool water, tracing hieroglyphic-like scratches etched into the stone walls. Markings that archaeologists believe recorded canal dimensions or ritual dedications. It's an odd practice, one fringe scholars link to ancient divination rites where water levels predicted seasonal fortunes, though many dismiss this as overinterpretation. Historians are still debating whether these inscriptions served a primarily practical engineering record or a magical invocation to water spirits. The murmuring echo of droplets dripping from above transforms the chamber into a cathedral of hush. Moss carpets the stones in velvet green patches, softening the chamber's geometry with organic whimsy. You crouch to study a carved symbol that resembles a coiled serpent, perhaps a tribute to mythical river guardians. A sudden bat-like creature skitters across the ceiling, disappearing into shadow, reminding you that nature. You leave the broad water avenues behind and press across a low causeway toward a cluster of wooden stakes rising like ancient pylons from the saturated earth. Each beam stands on end, driven deep into the marsh to support a world suspended above the floods. You hear your sandals squelch as you cross a narrow plank, and you nearly lose your balance. Watch your ankles. The mud underfoot is eager to reclaim any stray footfall. It's early morning. Mist curls between the piles like lazy serpents, revealing glimpses of thatched roofs and woven reed walls far above your head. Here, in the house of marsh gods, daily life unfolds on stilts, and the boundary between human and spirit feels as porous as the water below. Stepping up a short ladder of broad rungs carved from single logs, you arrive on a wide veranda built of flat planks lashed together with twisted reeds. The entire structure breathes with the wind. Floorboards creak in greeting, and bamboo posts sway gently in the breeze. Mainstream archaeological digs confirm these dwellings rose anywhere from 2 to 3 meters above the floodplain, a pragmatic adaptation that kept living spaces dry during high water. You notice beam holes carved into each post where reed mats once hung to ward off wind and rain. A simple yet effective shutter system. Beneath your feet, the planks feel cool and slightly damp, suggesting last night's waters nearly licked the floor. From this vantage, you survey a small courtyard of similar houses, all connected by narrow walkways of planks and poles. A soft clatter draws your attention to a nearby hearth area where a woman stokes a low clay oven built into the floor. Steam rises from a shallow pit where rice porridge simmers in an inverted gourd bowl, its lip choked with woven grass to maintain heat. She glances your way, eyes soft but amused. Visitors are rare this far back in the settlement. You crouch beside her, breathing in the gentle aroma of cooking grain and steamed fish. Mainstream studies of Liangzhu refuse pits reveal diets rich in rice, millet, and river fish, supplemented by foraged nuts and water chestnuts. Here, you taste a spoonful of porridge flecked with tiny shell fragments, an obscure culinary technique where crushed freshwater clamshells added calcium to the meal, believed to fortify bones in growing children. It's a taste that leaves a faint mineral grit on your tongue, oddly satisfying. From behind, a child squeals as she chases a small turtle across the veranda. The creature's mottled shell glints in the morning light before it darts off the edge and splashes into the canal below. Nearby, a toddler clings to woven reed railings, eyes wide with delight as he watches the turtle's retreat. You kneel to steady him, noting how cradles were often simple baskets woven of grass and hung from beams, swung gently to lull infants to sleep above the marsh's gentle sway. A broken reed basket underfoot suggests this makeshift nursery setup sometimes gave way under heavier weights. Archaeological evidence shows many toddlers buried in household pits, implying high child mortality. Still, parents crafted elaborate cradle charms, tiny jade beads stitched into cloth bags, to protect their young from imagined spirits. You pocket one such bead you find on the floor, its jade surface worn smooth by tiny fingers. Walking deeper into the house, you come upon a main living hall framed by vertical planks, their surfaces blackened by smoke and age. An earthen floor lies beneath your feet, compacted smooth by generations, and you note imprints of reed mats pressed into the mud. Along the far wall, 3 low platforms stand like silent sentinels, each covered in neatly woven grass mats. These platforms likely served as both seating and sleeping areas for different family members. Mainstream reconstructions propose a three-aisled layout where the central space functioned as communal hearth and gathering area, flanked by sleeping niches. Yet the precise social division remains elusive. Did each platform belong to a separate nuclear family or to individuals of distinct status? Historians are still debating this question, especially when considering the presence of high-value jade artifacts found alongside ordinary pottery shards in some house burials. In one corner, you discover a small wooden altar flanked by two jade cong shards that someone carefully wedged into carved recesses. Smoke stains on the nearby beam suggest incense once burned here, sending aromatic curls into the rafters. You run your fingers along a faded painted motif, a stylized water snake, tracing the scribbled curves with wonder. Mainstream findings indicate ancestors' worship played a pivotal role in Liangzhu domestic life, with each household maintaining its own small shrine. Yet obscure fragments from Site H hint at a curious variant. Some families placed a hollowed clay figure of a frog atop the altar, claiming its croaks summoned rain spirits to bless the fields. Modern scholars debate whether this was a localized folk practice or evidence of a broader marsh deity veneration. Either way, the juxtaposition of family hearth and spirit shrine creates an atmosphere where everyday chores and cosmic forces intertwine seamlessly. Stepping outside again, you perch on the edge of the veranda to observe your neighbors. A group of women sits in a circle on woven mats, plucking fine threads from reeds to weave new baskets. Their nimble fingers loop and knot with practiced ease, producing goods for grain storage and fish traps alike. An obscure detail, some baskets incorporate dyed fibers derived from crushed madder plant roots, giving them a faint pink hue that symbolizes purification. Archaeobotanical studies have uncovered traces of madder pigment in house refuse layers, suggesting this wasn't merely aesthetic, but tied to cleansing rituals before major ceremonies. You pick up a small basket still damp from morning dew, admiring the delicate stripe that marches around its circumference like a tiny watercourse. You wander down a narrow plank path to a communal latrine area. Yes, even ancient comforts had plumbing of a sort. Elevated above the marsh on piles, these stone-lined pits contained channels that drained into nearby ditches, carrying away waste with the next tide. Mainstream analyses suggest Liangzhu engineers understood basic sanitation. Yet you notice a row of smooth sandstone pebbles lined at the pit's edge, their purpose unclear. Local lore, seldom recorded in official reports, claims these pebbles were rubbed on the body afterward, a primitive but thoughtful hygiene practice that historians often gloss over. It's a tiny testament to how even personal needs received creative solutions in this stilted world. Under the eaves of the largest house, you find several storage jars shaped like small-bellied gourds, tightly sealed with woven reed lids weighted by stone tokens. In one jar, you glimpse a cluster of small bone tools, awls and needles used for sewing reed mats and leather thongs. Mainstream excavations confirm that textile production thrived here, with flax and hemp fibers abundant in domestic contexts. Yet an obscure study notes that some textile fragments show traces of human hair spun into the weave, possibly to increase strength or perhaps as an ancestral dedication, weaving part of one's own body into everyday objects. You ponder the intimacy of such a practice, a literal weaving of self into the fabric of communal life. As the sun rises higher, you climb back onto the veranda of your host's house. She gestures toward a curtained alcove draped in dyed fabrics, where small ceramic figurines stand atop a low table. These figurines, stylized human forms with triangular faces and tiny incised eyes, might represent departed ancestors or local marsh spirits. Mainstream interpretations favor the ancestor veneration theory, linking these vessels to funerary offerings found in house floors. But some scholars propose they depict protective deities, guardians of the marsh realm. Historians remain divided, and you feel the tension in the unresolved debate as keenly as any breeze rustling roof thatch. At midday, families gather for a communal meal under a suspended bamboo canopy, sharing bowls of rice, fish, and wild tubers. You take a seat among them, spooning porridge into your mouth as they chat in a dialect that echoes with guttural tones and rising inflections. Untranslatable now, but once as vivid as the river's roar. An elder leans over to you, voice low. "Tonight, we honor the marsh mother," she says, her eyes distant. We'll bake offerings into clay boats and send them down the canal to bless our homes. You nod, intrigued, though you've already encountered this peculiarity. The ritual of floating miniature clay vessels laden with food down waterways. Some archaeologists interpret the clay boats as fertility rites. Others view them as boundary markers to ward flood spirits. Historians are still debating this question, noting that few intact clay boats survive to confirm either theory fully. After the meal, you follow the path to a dimly lit side chamber where a small fire glows in a shallow pit. Around it, elders recount tales of the Marsh Mother, a deity said to slumber beneath the deepest channels, rising only when her domain is threatened. One story tells of a past flood so fierce that ancestors appeased her with jade tokens dropped into the water. You watch as a child carefully places a tiny disc beside the fire, the jade surface glowing in lamplight. Archaeological layers at certain canal intersections. You stand at the base of a colossal earthen mound that rises abruptly from the flat plain, its tiers stacked like giant pancakes of mud and straw. Each layer measures roughly 10 meters wide, creating a stepped profile that dominates the horizon of swaying reeds and distant canals. The morning light glints off damp surfaces as you place your foot on the first makeshift stair, an uneven ridge packed by countless workers' feet. Above you, the summit shimmers like a mirage, suggesting a cosmic stage where earth and sky may converge. In this moment, you're neither wholly human nor deity but a pilgrim drawn to the celestial platform, that sacred heart of Liangzhu's ritual world. As you begin your ascent, the slope beneath your feet feels oddly springy, the compressed layers of mud and straw acting like a giant memory foam mattress that sighs under your weight. Mainstream archaeological excavations date the primary construction of this mound to around 3000 BCE, making it one of the earliest monumental earthworks in Neolithic China. It may once have been clad in wooden palisades or reed matting to protect against erosion, though none of that superstructure survives. A faint chalky odor rises from the soil, hinting at crushed oyster shells mixed into the embankment, a practice meant to repel burrowing creatures and reinforce the platform's integrity, according to obscure field reports seldom noted in popular summaries. You climb steadily, each tier requiring a brief pause to catch your breath and admire the panorama below. From here, you see a complex network of canals radiating outward like arteries, fed by the same waters that nourish the rice fields back home. Despite its utilitarian grandeur, this platform also served as a stage for celestial observation. Its precise orientation aligns roughly with the rising sun at the winter solstice. Historians are still debating this question, whether the platform was intentionally aligned for astronomical ceremonies or if the orientation simply followed the practical lines of adjacent levees. Either way, you sense that the mound's builders possessed sophisticated surveying skills, possibly using simple sighting poles and rope measures to strike straight lines and right angles. Halfway up, you notice a series of shallow pits cut into the earthen terrace, each lined with clay and scattered with tiny jade fragments. The largest pit measures nearly a meter across and sits directly on the platform's second tier. Its ragged edges suggest it once held offerings, bis and songs broken deliberately before burial, perhaps symbolizing the gifting of heaven and earth. An odd detail, a handful of these pits also contained charred millet seeds, implying that grain was burned alongside jade in sacrificial rites, an obscure ritual practice that modern agronomists still puzzle over. Mainstream studies confirm that such mixed offerings appear at several Liangzhu sites, suggesting a ritual connection between agriculture and spiritual homage. You continue upward, stepping over thin wooden beams that protrude like rungs of a hidden ladder. These beams mark the positions of post holes where short poles once supported small, temporary structures, perhaps lookout huts for priests or platforms for lanterns during nocturnal ceremonies. Fringe theories propose these huts housed primitive star charts carved on wood, making the celestial platform an early observatory. Yet no direct evidence of carved charts has emerged. Most scholars dismiss this as speculative, preferring to view the post holes as simple supports for ceremonial canopies. Historians are still debating this question, and as you brush your hand along one weathered beam, you wonder if you're touching the remnants of ancient sky watching. As you crest the third tier, the wind picks up, carrying with it the salty tang of river water and the sweet aroma of crushed reeds. Beneath your shoes, the soil turns chalkier, Here the builders inlaid layers of white clay to distinguish ceremonial zones. At your feet lies a narrow trench filled with flattened cowrie shells, their glossy surfaces reflecting sunlight. These shells, likely imported from coastal regions, might have functioned as symbolic markers for ritual processions, guiding participants along prescribed paths. It's a curious detail that underscores Liangzhu's far-reaching trade networks and spiritual complexity. Ahead, a broad staircase hewn into the mound's face leads to the summit. Each step shows signs of wear, grooves carved by thousands of sandals slipping and sliding over centuries. You advance carefully, mindful that a misstep could send you tumbling into the abyss of history. At the top, you stand on a circular terrace roughly 20 meters across, its rim delineated by a low earthen berm. The panorama is breathtaking. Endless fields and waterways stretch in all directions, punctuated by distant platform mounds like silent sentinels. You realize this was no mere podium but a sacred crossroads linking land, water, and sky. In the center of the summit sits a flat, polished sandstone slab, an altar whose surface bears faint incised lines forming parallel grooves. Mainstream interpretations propose this altar served for communal feasting or libation ceremonies, perhaps involving rice wine poured into shallow basins. Yet an obscure excavation report mentions small charcoal flecks embedded in the grooves, hinting at burnt offerings or ritual fires kindled directly upon the stone. You crouch to inspect those grooves, imagining the hiss of flame meeting stone. Around the altar's base lie dozens of ceramic jars, still bearing whispers of their contents. Fragments of lotus petals, crushed into tiny flakes, cling to the jar rims, suggesting floral fumigation to cleanse the sacred space before rites. This peculiar detail is seldom mentioned in broad histories but appears in specialized botanical studies of Liangzhu sites. It's a delicate reminder that rituals encompassed not only jade and grain but fragrant botanicals, engaging all the senses in an immersive spiritual experience. You step back and survey a half-circle of low earthen benches built into the platform's edge. Scholars describe these as seating for elite participants, priest chiefs or dignitaries who presided over ceremonies. Yet signs of wear on the bench's surfaces correspond with repeated communal use, suggesting they accommodated larger gatherings. Historians are still debating this question. Was the celestial platform an exclusive enclave for a few, or did it host mass processions of commoners? It's a debate you feel keenly now as you imagine dozens of villagers seated shoulder to shoulder, chanting mantras to summon rain or bless the harvest. A sudden rustle of wind brings fluttering banners into view. Narrow strips of silk or hemp dyed with ochre and crimson, fastened to tall poles along the terrace rim. These banners bear stylized water symbol patterns, swirling like eddies in motion. Their colors, now faded, once gleamed brightly under midday sun. Fringe accounts suggest the dyes included crushed cinnabar to produce a vivid red, although most archaeologists doubt that poison-laced pigment would be used so liberally. Historians are still debating this question, whether the banners served purely decorative purposes or carried deeper symbolic weight, maybe representing river spirits or ancestral guardians circling the platform. You follow the banner-lined path to a small alcove at the mound's eastern side, where a pair of stone steles stand guard. Each stele bears an incised spiral motif, one carved clockwise, the other anti-clockwise, perhaps representing yin and yang or the cyclical tides. Mainstream readings link these spirals to water cycles vital for rice cultivation, a practical spirituality in stone. Yet obscure theories interpret the spirals as astronomical symbols charting lunar phases, implying a dual agricultural and lunar calendar function. Historians are still debating this question, so you leave the stele standing silent, their true meaning caught between earthbound toil and the swirling heavens. From the alcove, you gaze out as clouds scuttle across the sky. Lightning scrawls momentarily light the horizon, and you shiver, though it's not cold. This atop the platform, you sense the raw power of nature, thunder that might stir ancestral spirits, rain that could drown fields or renew them. A distant rumble merges with the low murmur of gathered voices below, carried up by the wind like a distant chant. You picture a ceremony underway. Priests in flowing robes of dyed hemp, scepters topped with jade discs held skyward, calling upon deities to harmonize waters and weather. You step down to a lower terrace where dozens of small pits hold charcoal and broken pottery. Here, ritual feasting might have occurred, each pit serving as a communal hearth. Obscure bone fragments found in similar contexts suggest that fish bones, perhaps carp or eel, formed part of a ceremonial banquet, celebrating river sustenance. Mainstream zooarchaeological studies confirm that fish remains dominate ritual deposits at Liangzhu sites, reinforcing the intimate link between water and worship. As you hover over one pit, a small breeze stirs ash motes into the air, reminding you of long-extinguished fires and feasts now lost to time. Retracing your steps, you pause by a cluster of jade congs arranged in a near-perfect circle, a discovery that puzzled excavators, who uncovered them during a 1970s dig. Some of these congs bear mask-like faces thought to represent deities or ancestral guardians. An odd observation. One mask sports an asymmetric. You drift away from the celestial platform at dawn, guiding your small dugout canoe down a winding tributary that feeds the Yangtze's broad highway. Mist clings to the water's surface like drifting silk as you round a bend and spot a cluster of boats moored at a raised earthen landing. Their hulls lean heavily under the weight of goods. Pale shells stacked in woven baskets, carved bone toggles strung on cords, and jade pieces wrapped in soft linen. Traders from distant marshlands and coastal communities stand ankle-deep in crisp water, shouting cheerful greetings in dialects you barely recognize. It's here, at this bustling riverside market, that Liangzhu's people come to exchange the wealth of their fields and workshops for exotic treasures carried from far-flung shores. You beach your canoe and step onto a muddy ramp, dusting silt from your sandals as you approach a tall man with weather-worn skin. His boat's prow is painted with a stylized fish, a mark his family has used for generations. He holds out a string of cowrie shells, pale, spiraled orbs once scraped from the South China Sea, and offers them in trade for one of your jade cong fragments. Mainstream studies confirm that cowrie shells functioned as a form of currency across Neolithic China, prized for their rarity and smooth, ivory-like texture. At Liangzhu, these shells circulated widely, appearing in burial sites alongside jade and pottery. You run your fingers over their glossy surfaces, imagining them carried on ocean breezes before finally arriving here, nestled among local wares. Nearby, a diminutive woman unpacks bundles of carved bird bones, delicate flutes fashioned from crane wing bones, each bearing tiny finger holes. She offers to play a quick tune, and you hum along as she brings forth a clear, piercing note that echoes across the water. Obscure ethno-archaeological records suggest these bone whistles were used in water dance rituals to honor river spirits, their tones thought to mimic the cries of marsh birds. Some scholars even propose that traders gifted these instruments as peace offerings to new communities along the river route, a ritual exchange of songs before trade began. It's a fascinating detail rarely noted in broad histories, yet it lends a haunting musicality to the market's chatter. A group of Liangzhu elders gathers around a low wooden table strewn with jade by discs and scepters. You slip between them to watch the bargaining dance. One elder holds up a small bai, its concentric grooves catching the morning light like ripples on the Yangtze. 2 shell strings and a bundle of salted fish, he suggests, tapping the disc center with an authoritative finger. The trader shakes her head, counter-offering a bone toggle carved into a stylized deer antler. Mainstream evidence shows that such antler-shaped toggles were highly valued for their connection to forest-hunted game, a reminder of the broader ecological riches beyond marsh and river. You bite back a smile as the two haggle in clipped tones, each side aware that reputation here matters as much as the goods themselves. You wander past wooden stalls piled high with pottery jars from neighboring settlements. Their shapes differ subtly from Liangzhu styles, rounded bodies with narrow necks, decorated in simple black-on-red brushwork. Archaeologists identify these as raw materials from the Longshan culture upriver, indicating that Liangzhu's trade network extended well into the Yellow River basin. Historians are still debating whether these jars arrived via direct travel or changed hands through multiple intermediary traders, each adding their own goods and local flair before the pots finally reached this market. Standing among the pots, you can almost feel the swirl of countless journeys, broken trips, barter deals, river currents, all converging in this one spot. A cheerful shout draws you toward a stall draped in woven reed mats, where a lanky youth displays necklaces of polished shells drilled with tiny holes. Each bead is strung on sinew and spaced with bone spacers carved into miniature fish shapes. You lift one to your ear and shake it gently. The beads click like distant raindrops on reeds. The youth explains, though through a translator, that these necklaces were made from shell species found only on the eastern coast, nearly 200 kilometers away. Obscure marine sediment studies suggest that those shells date to warmer ocean currents, hinting at subtle climate variations 5,000 years ago. This small artifact, he says, carries the memory of tidal rhythms long forgotten. You turn to a stout trader unloading oblong pouches woven from flax fibers. He unties one and spills its contents. Gleaming green pebbles of unworked jade, rough as river stones. His ancestors quarried similar jade from the Kunlun foothills, transported on overland paths until finally floated down tributaries to Liangzhu's doorstep. Mainstream geological analysis shows that Liangzhu's jade artifacts trace back to at least 3 distinct mountain sources, demonstrating a complex procurement network that spanned thousands of miles. You pick up a pebble and weigh it in your palm, a raw promise of artistry waiting to be released under bamboo drills and sandstone abrasion. Overhead, threads of linen flutter like flags, marking the routes each trader traveled. A faded banner reads Sea Drifters of the East, a guild that once escorted merchant vessels along the coast before unloading goods at river mouths. You recall obscure inscriptions on nearby stelae at a coastal site mentioning sea drifters who ventured upriver, though no direct textual evidence survives here. Historians remain divided on whether these guilds operated under formal rules or were loose alliances formed in response to trade opportunities. Either way, you sense the thrill of early mercantile enterprise. A world in flux, where every exchange created new alliances and transformed local economies. A boisterous group of children races between stalls, clutching handfuls of small shell beads they've filched from unattended baskets. They giggle as they dart across a raised platform strewn with rice husks, weaving around traders' legs like energetic minnows. You remember reading an obscure excavation report noting that juvenile pilfering was so common in Neolithic markets that some merchants began concealing prized items beneath reed mats or within false compartments of pottery jars. That report went largely unnoticed in mainstream overviews, yet it offers a charming glimpse of everyday life, a reminder that even in the grand narratives of kings and priests, children found ways to play the system. Nearby, a solemn priest stands before a pile of jade cong etchings and raises his polished jade baton in blessing. May this jade journey safely to its new home, he intones in a low voice, fingers tracing the weathered grooves of a large ritual tube. You watch as he breathes on the stone, eyes closed in reverence. Mainstream scholarship emphasizes jade's spiritual power, linking it to immortality and cosmic balance. Yet an obscure fragmentary text from a cache at a secondary platform mentions a ritual of teaching the stone our words, suggesting that personal prayers may have been addressed directly to jade artifacts before they traveled beyond Liangzhu's borders. It's a poignant, almost anthropomorphic touch to the trade ritual that few have recorded. The mid-morning sun climbs higher and you feel thirsty. A vendor offers you a cup of rice wine infused with wild mint, an unexpected treat. You sip the tart, cooling liquid and let it settle in your belly, marveling that this beverage traveled no further than the next village, yet feels entirely new in this market's atmosphere. Archaeobotanical studies confirm that mint was cultivated in small garden plots near Liangzhu settlements, but you'd never have guessed its role in local libations. This fringe knowledge, gleaned from specialized pollen core analyses, adds a fresh note to your sense impressions. A call goes up, Jade! Fresh boulders for the first auction of the day. Curious, you join the crowd around a raised platform built for bidders. Several large, unworked jade nodules rest atop woven mats, their rough exteriors hinting at hidden veins of pure green. The auctioneer, a man with a carved bone whistle at his belt, blows 3 notes to signal the start. Bidders hold up woven reed paddles stamped with ownership marks, circles, spirals, fish motifs. Each motif identifies the buyer's lineage and standing in Liangzhu society, a creative precursor to heraldry. Mainstream interpreters suggest this system helped regulate jade distribution among elites, preventing monopolies and ensuring ritual access. However, historians are still debating whether commoners could ever acquire such raw jade or if the auctions were restricted to a priestly caste. You raise your own paddle, dipped in ochre to signify your humble status as a traveling guest, and stand ready. The bids begin low, 2 shell strings, then quickly rise as a local dignitary counters with a bone armlet and a pair of reed mats. You hesitate, heart pounding at the prospect of overpaying, but decide to test the waters. 3 shell strings and 1 bone toggle. You call out, voice surprisingly steady. A hush falls over the crowd, all eyes turning to you. The dignitary pauses, eyes narrowing beneath a reed-woven hat. Finally, he nods and raises his paddle in acceptance. You win your first jade boulder. A cheer erupts, and you grin broadly as attendants wrap the stone in linen and sling it over your shoulder. It's a heavy load. You wake before dawn to a low, eerily silent rumble that isn't thunder. The marsh around you feels impossibly still, as if the world is holding its breath. Underfoot, the mud is softer, more treacherous than ever before. As you step from your stilted dwelling onto the narrow walkway, you notice water pooling at unexpected corners. Tiny eddies coalescing into small streams that snake across the planks. In the distance, the river's surface gleams under a slate-gray sky, its breadth swollen beyond any normal channel. You pause, heart thudding. This is no ordinary seasonal high water. Today you will confront flood's fury. By mid-morning, the distant rumble grows into a relentless roar. You follow the quivering wooden walkways toward the city's edge, where the grand levee walls loom like ancient ramparts. Water laps at their bases, dark and churning with fresh silt. Mainstream geological surveys confirm that Liangzhu experienced several major flood events between 2600 and 2400 BCE, with the most catastrophic inundation dated around 2450 BCE, likely triggered by extreme monsoon rains upriver. Tonight, you're witnessing the raw power of those same meteorological forces, centuries before modern dams or floodgates could offer relief. The first barrier falls without warning. A low section of embankment collapses under the weight of pent-up water, sending a jagged spray of mud and reeds skyward. You're caught in the splash zone, your clothes heavy with sludge, but you manage to scramble for higher ground on a raised platform. From there, you watch a tidal wave surge through the breach, rolling across paddy terraces and canals like a living beast. Timber stakes, reed mats, and even small boats ride the wave, tossed aside like driftwood. The entire hydraulic network you admired in Chapter 3 transforms into a broken lattice of half-submerged embankments and swirling currents. Around you, villagers cry out orders in tense shouts, hauling ropes to shore up weaker sections with bundles of brushwood and layered clay. Despite their swift action, another breach opens further downstream. You rush along a plank path to find workers grubbing brush into a bulky dam, tossing clumps of earth atop woven basket sacks. Mainstream reconstructions suggest that Liangzhu's hydraulic engineers preemptively stockpiled woven mud baskets, similar to later Gabian techniques, to patch breaches quickly. Yet today, even these ingenious measures seem inadequate against the flood's voracious appetite. You scramble onto a narrow levee crest just as a second wave sweeps down the canal, frothing like a giant beast awakened. Leaning into the wind, you brace yourself against the thunderous rush. Below, water fills wooden sluice gates, lifting them like corks before flipping them aside. The sluices that once controlled irrigation now serve as gaping mouths vomiting water into vulnerable fields and passageways. Desperation sets in. Efforts to lower counterweights or jam gates fail against the sheer force of the current. In this moment, you truly grasp the precarious balance Liangzhu's people maintained with nature. A balance they sought to master, but could never fully contain. A sudden crack echoes overhead as one of the watchtowers at the edge of the flooded plain splinters under the weight of wind and rain. You sprint along the raised walkway, rain stinging your cheeks as you approach the ruins. 2 sentinels inside the tower tumble from the broken beams, their jade scepters clattering on the planks before disappearing into a rushing torrent. You're torn between rescuing them and securing the levee behind you. Instinct prevails. You race down to the saturated earth and tug at a fraying rope, guiding a drifting canoe toward shelter. Both men manage to cling to its sides, coughing through mud-slick hair as you push them toward firmer ground. Everywhere you look, the city's bluff earthworks collapse in chunks, sending tumultuous cascades into the newly formed lakes. Pools of murky water spread beneath former rice paddies, submerging juvenile rice shoots that once promised a bountiful harvest. Mainstream agrarian studies show that even short-term flooding of young rice paddies could slash yields by up to 60%, setting off cascading food shortages. As you scramble across a waterlogged ridge, you realize the city's food supply teeters on the brink. With storage platforms inundated, granaries designed to keep harvests dry now float like half-sunken barges. You follow frantic shouts toward the central platform, where families huddle in stilted longhouses clutching precious belongings. Jade cong shards, small by discs, even carved bone amulets. One wide-eyed elder hands you a jade mask fragment, whispering a prayer as if the stone might shield you from harm. Mainstream interpretations underscore jade's protective symbolism in Liangzhu culture, its hardness and luster thought to ward off disaster. Yet in this deluge, even jade seems powerless before the relentlessness of water. Up on the platform's rooftop veranda, you witness the tallest earthen mound, once a symbol of sacred resilience, lose its grip on stability. Water seeps into its layered core, softening the packed mud and straw like a sponge. Each rumble and settling groan sends shockwaves through your bones. You recall that in some excavated sections, archaeologists found horizontal fissures in the mound structure, evidence that sections collapsed after intense flooding. Historians are still debating whether these fissures resulted from isolated flood events or from long-term degradation. Today, you're living through what might have been that very moment of collapse. A sudden lightning flash illuminates the sky, revealing the battered silhouette of the celestial platform's summit. You can almost see specters of priests ushering rituals against water spirits, a haunting echo of Chapter 5's solemn ceremonies. Drums and conch shells, once sounded in hope of placating the heavens, now lie abandoned on a waterlogged altar. A distant chant rises above the storm, a final litany to marsh and sky that drifts away as rain pounds into the earth like spears. You find yourself drawn to a flooded courtyard that once bustled with basket weaving and hearth fires. Now, only half of its stilts remain intact. Planks float like rafts carrying broken baskets and shattered pottery. You wade through waist-high water to reach a submerged hearth, where charcoal still smolders in wet ashes. An impossible sight, yet evidence of the flood's ferocity. Obscure notes from a seldom-cited excavation record mention similar hearths found with smoldering embers, suggesting that some families attempted to keep fires burning even as water encroached. It's a testament to human stubbornness in the face of annihilation. As the storm peaks, you press on toward a collapsed aqueduct that once fed water to upper terraces. Stone culverts lie cracked and fetid, clogged with reeds and fish kills. You scramble atop a fallen beam and peer into the murky depths. Dead carp and turtles drift belly up, caught in the aqueduct's slow death. Mainstream zooarchaeological data confirms spikes in fish mortality during ancient floods, leaving telltale layers of bone and silt in the archaeological record. Yet you shudder to think of the ecological toll, wetlands stripped of life even as humans clung desperately to survival. Shouts erupt from a nearby ridge. Villagers have discovered a sinking gap in the outer dam, where water cascades through hidden tunnels burrowed by rodents and perhaps by pressure fractures beneath. You race toward the breach, where a narrow channel directs a lethal stream under a collapsed walkway. Graffiti-like scratchings on the mud wall reveal tally marks, as if someone counted each narrowing drip, an obscure indicator of sustained seepage that rarely appears in mainstream flood chronicles. Historians are still debating the significance of these marks, questioning whether they represented meteorological data or were superstitious omens. You join a small crew shoveling mud and stones into the hole, but the torrent laughs at your efforts. Clumps of earth wash away faster than you can replace them. Someone shouts to fetch willow branches, used for quick bundling into watertight sheaths. Within moments, a crude willow fascine blocks part of the flow, buying precious minutes. You stand back, dripping and breathless, as the patch holds for now. It's a moment of triumph in a battle predestined for defeat. Rain slackens to a heavy mist by late afternoon, revealing the full extent of devastation. Water levels stabilize but refuse to recede, leaving the city half-drowned and eerily distorted. Platform edges look like islands in a vast, gray sea. You stand on a submerged walkway and imagine the scene centuries later, when archaeologists will uncover silt layers over mud walls, marveling at the sudden sediment dump. Sediment cores taken from flooded Liangzhu terraces show rapid deposition events, thick layers of mixed clay and organic debris, all pointing to a single, dramatic inundation. You're experiencing that sediment's birth. Amid the wreckage, you find survivors huddled around a broken causeway, salvaging what they can. One woman clasps a jade to her chest, tears mixing with mud on her cheeks. A child hands you a small, waterlogged reed doll, an obscure keepsake recorded in a single excavation report as evidence of children's toys surviving submergence. It's an intimate reminder. You step onto a raised earthen terrace, the same platform you once climbed to observe shimmering canals now softened beneath a blanket of fine, yellow-brown silt. Your sandals sink almost imperceptibly into the powdery ground, as if the earth has inhaled centuries of sediment and forgotten to exhale. Around you, low mounds that once held longhouses appear as gentle hills, their carved wooden posts reduced to ghostly stumps. In the hush of early morning, you feel the weight of time pressing down. This is the moment when the Jade Metropolis surrendered to the steady insistence of Yangtze's sediment. A gentle breeze stirs the dust, sending miniature avalanches sliding down slopes like silent waterfalls. Mainstream geological studies date this burial process to roughly 2300 BCE, when a combination of monsoon-driven floods and river shifts unleashed vast quantities of silt downstream, blanketing Liangzhu's terraces under meters of clay and organic debris. As you trail your fingers through the fine grains, you sense the city's pulse fading, replaced by the slow heartbeat of deposition. You walk along an old canal embankment now half-buried, scanning the horizon for the faint outlines of stilted structures. Here, snail shells embedded in the lower mud layers provide an obscure clue. Researchers have found that crushed freshwater snail valves increased soil porosity, inadvertently accelerating silt accumulation in some areas. It's a quirky ecological twist, that a humble mollusk might have guided the very sediments that claimed its habitat, a detail seldom celebrated in broad histories. Ever so often, you uncover fragments of pottery peeking through the alluvial cover. Each shard is a time capsule. The ribbed design on one dates to the culture's earliest pottery styles, while a smoother fragment hints at later refinement. These ceramic scraps confirm that the city lay in place long enough for artistic traditions to evolve before its burial. Yet you pause, recalling a contested debate among archaeologists. Some argue the sediment deposit represents a single cataclysmic event, while others see it as gradual layering over centuries. Historians are still debating this question, and as you sift through dusty fragments, you wonder which narrative feels truer beneath your fingertips. A sudden shift of wind reveals a half-submerged wooden post, its grain preserved but softened by moisture. You recall that timber never preserves well in open air. Yet here it lies, buried just below the surface, shielded from oxygen. Fringe experimental studies show that anaerobic pockets in river sediment can turn wood into a near-living form, keeping its cellular structures intact for millennia. You kneel to examine the post, tracing faint tool marks where carpenters once smoothed its surface, marveling at how nature's tomb sometimes becomes an unintentional archive. Up ahead, a line of small gullies channels rainwater away from the buried platform. These gullies cut shallow paths, their edges marked by darker, richer soil, organic matter decayed in place, now forming a subtle band under the top layer of silt. You note that microfaunal remains, tiny seeds, bits of insect exoskeleton, linger within those darker seams, offering paleoecologists a rare glimpse of Liangzhu's vanished biodiversity. It's an obscure record, extracted from around 50 sediment cores, but it steadily reconstructs a lost ecosystem once dominated by reeds, water chestnut patches, and wild rice stands. As you traverse a shallow depression that might have been a small courtyard, you disturb a clay lump that unveils a perfectly circular imprint. Once a cooking pot lid, now fossilized in mud. Mainstream typological analysis dates the lid to the culture's middle period, suggesting that domestic life thrived here less than a generation before the flood of silt swept everything away. Holding that imprint, you feel the hush of unfinished meals, flickering hearth lights, and children's footsteps frozen in time. You climb onto a barely discernible causeway, its banks visible only by the faint rise in ground level. At certain points, the silt layer splits to reveal an eroded channel beneath, an earlier canal alignment that shifted as the river carved new courses. Some obscure geomorphological surveys propose that such channel migrations forced Liangzhu's engineers to rebuild sections of their hydraulic network multiple times, stretching resources thin. Whether these repeated reconstructions weakened the city's defenses remains a point of scholarly contention. A flock of egrets circles overhead, their sharp calls cutting through the silence. They swoop low, feet grazing the sediment as if tasting the memories buried beneath. In the whispers of their wings you almost hear the laughter of children playing on raised walkways, or the rhythmic drumbeat of communal gatherings long vanished. You close your eyes, letting the avian chorus summon ghosts of a lost population. Further on, the ground quivers underfoot where a compacted mud wall once stood. You lift your foot to reveal a though barely discernible ditch on one side, part of a drainage trench that carried excess water away during seasonal floods. Mainstream excavations have mapped these trenches under pristine conditions, but here they emerge in fragmentary relief, beckoning you to sketch their outlines in shifting silt. The clarity of these features suggests that initial construction used well-compacted clay with precise layering, a testament to Liangzhu's engineering prowess. You pause at the crest of a gentle rise and notice a small bowl-shaped hollow filled with rainwater. Filtering your gaze through its mirror surface, you glimpse not only your reflection but a tangle of submerged reeds and wood, remnants of wooden palisade posts that once ringed a sacred precinct. Obscure pollen analyses from similar hollows identify fragments of chrysanthemum and mugwort, plants used in purification rites. These proxies hint that the precinct hosted seasonal ceremonies to renew community bonds, even as the river of silt threatened to erase every trace. A soft drizzle begins, transforming silt into sticky clay that clings to your clothes. Each raindrop strikes the mound with a muted thud, echoing through the stillness as if tapping out a message from the past. You reach up to adjust your hood and notice an odd pattern in the mud. 3 concentric circles scratched into the surface, like a hastily drawn map or a ritual sigil. Loose threads of an obscure field report come to mind, describing similar markings interpreted by some as boundary markers for clan territories. Meanwhile, mainstream consensus treats them as survey marks left by ancient labor overseers. Historians are still debating this question, and here you stand at the crossroads of both interpretations. As rain intensifies, you follow a low ridge toward what appears to be a buried longhouse foundation. The rectangular outline emerges as slightly elevated strips of firm clay, punctuated by evenly spaced depressions where wooden posts once anchored beams. You step carefully between the depressions, imagining poles rising above you to support a sloping roof. Scatterings of crushed snail shell, used as a primitive mortar-like filler, cemented the beams in place, a remarkable Neolithic construction trick. It's an obscure detail that bridges domestic life and building technology, underscoring how craftspeople repurposed every available resource. Emerging from the rain, you reach a broad, flat expanse of powdery silt that covers an area once lined with stilted dwellings. You notice dark patches scattered across the white clutch, a mixture of charcoal flecks and crushed pottery shards that escaped complete burial. Mainstream stratigraphic analysis shows these patches align with ancient hearths, their glow extinguished only by subsequent silt layers. Yet these hearth outlines remain legible, like heartbeat traces in a cardiac monitor, marking clusters of daily warmth and communal cooking. A sudden wind gust tears away a thin sheet of top silt, revealing a cluster of small jade fragments arranged as if in tribute. You crouch to examine them. Broken scraps of cong and by discs, the jade surface still polished from handling. Archaeologists interpret such deposits as intentional closure rituals, a final offering before abandoning the site. Others argue the assemblages result from natural washing down of hillside refuse. Historians are still debating this question, but to you the fragments feel purposeful, stone memories laid to rest beneath new earth. You wander toward a deep swale that channels water into a hidden basin, now filled by runoff into a temporary pond. Around its rim, tiny fish swim in circles, snatching at drifting insects. Beneath the waterline, you catch glimpses of submerged stakes, evidence that this pond once served as a fish farming enclosure, an obscure aquaculture practice known only from a handful of Liangzhu sites. Mainstream zooarchaeological reports confirm these enclosures helped stabilize food supplies, but how widespread they were remains uncertain. Standing by the water's edge, you sense life persisting even as memory recedes beneath layers of mud. The drizzle slows, and you press on to a low mound crowned by a half-buried stone altar. Its surface bears faint incised lines forming a ring and dot motif, symbols associated with rainmaking ceremonies. Mainstream interpretations link this motif to cosmological maps of star constellations. Obscure ethnographic parallels suggest they might also represent raindrops or river whirlpools. Historian, you step into a flooded paddy field at first light, the water cold against your shins as dawn's pale glow spreads across endless grids of mud and rice shoots. The earth squishes beneath your boots, each step releasing upward puffs of mist from pockets of trapped warmth. It's planting season, and farmers wield wooden plows drawn by sturdy water buffalo, cutting straight furrows through the soft soil. You follow the chatter of their voices, a low murmur of anticipation and small jokes, until a sudden shout slices the morning calm. "Look at this!" one farmer calls, voice cracking with excitement. His plow blade has clipped a hard object deep in the mud. He wrenches it free and holds it aloft. A pale green sliver of stone, its edges too smooth and its color too luminous to be ordinary rock. It glints like a shard of moonlight trapped in wet clay. Your heartbeat quickens. This is no common pebble. It's a fragment of jade, and in this moment you realize the ground beneath you still breathes secrets from 5 millennia past. You wade forward through the flooded furrows, mud sucking at your legs, until you reach the farmer. He cradles the jade piece in one calloused hand, wiping mud with the other to reveal its soft translucence. It bears a faint carved groove, an incised line that might have once formed part of a ritual by disc or cong tube. Mainstream archaeological records tell us that Liangzhu culture flourished between roughly 3,300 and 2,300 BCE, and that its artisans specialized in carving jade into cong and by forms for ceremonial use. You trace the groove with a reverent fingertip, feeling the continuity of human touch across the ages. Around you, the farmers press in close, curious eyes reflecting dawn's glow. They're villagers whose families have tilled these fields for generations, yet none recall ever finding such stone. An obscure local tale speaks of ghost stones turning up after storms, but most dismissed those stories as fanciful. Today, however, the farmers treat the jade with hushed awe. One places it in a woven straw basket marked for special finds, a practice inherited from grandparents who saved strange artifacts to sell at distant markets. It's a quirky tradition rarely mentioned in scholarly texts but preserved in village memory. Word spreads swiftly. Jade in the rice paddy. Within hours, a small caravan of scholars, curiosity seekers, and two-eyed reporters converges at the field's edge. You join them, greeting the site director, a bespectacled archaeologist named Dr. Lin, who examines the fragment beneath a hand lens. She nods, excitement softening her usually measured tone. "This matches Liangzhu motifs," she says, holding the fragment to the light. "We must map this location precisely." Historians are still debating whether such scattered jade finds indicate ritual depositions at household levels or accidental losses along transportation routes. Today, you're at the threshold of that debate. Dr. Lin lays out a grid of wooden stakes and string, dividing the field into neat 1-meter squares. You kneel beside her as she marks the central grid, the spot where the jade emerged. A team of workers lifts thin layers of soil with bamboo trowels, brushing mud aside like a soft rain revealing petals. Each powdery sweep uncovers whispers of the past. A fragment of pottery rim here, a stray shark's tooth there, likely remnants of tools or ritual offerings. You hold your breath whenever a glint of jade appears, ready to share the thrill of rediscovery. After removing the topsoil, you spot another subtle shimmer. A delicate circle of jade half embedded in clay. Carefully, you scrape away the surrounding mud to reveal a crescent shape, a fragment of a bi-disc, its interior surface polished to a glassy sheen. The disc would once have symbolized the heavens in Liangzhu cosmology, a mainstream interpretation supported by artistic parallels across multiple sites. Yet some scholars argue this heavenly association might be a later projection, maintaining that we lack direct texts to confirm its original meaning. Historians are still debating this question. As the sun climbs, you and the team uncover more jade. Tiny subtriangular blades, fragments of congs carved with mask motifs, even a small loop fitting that once capped a ritual scepter. Each piece tells a fragment of the story, echoing a city buried beneath layers of silt and soil. The workers whisper among themselves. The rice fields were built over tombs. One ventures, half in jest. Another mutters of spirits hungry for offerings. You smile, but inside you feel the electric charge of contact with something ancient and inscrutable. Dr. Lin calls for careful sieving of adjacent soil to catch any microshards. You gather handfuls of dirt and pass them through a fine mesh screen, tiny grains tumbling through until only fragments larger than a centimeter remain. Among those clumps, you spot a translucent sliver smaller than your thumbnail. It's faded green against the dark mud. You lift it with a fine brush and sense its smooth weight, a silent testament to the precision of Neolithic carvers. Midday finds the team taking shelter under a makeshift canopy of woven reed mats. You sip cool water from a gourd, savoring the relief. A line of aged farmers stands on the fringe, sharing memories of family lore about strange stones unearthed in nearby fields but long forgotten. An obscure footnote in a regional gazetteer mentions a similar find in the 1920s. A jade fragment reputedly displayed in a Shanghai museum before vanishing during wartime. Historians are still debating whether that artifact originated at Liangzhu or from a later burial site nearby. Refreshed, you return to the grid, where Dr. Lin has discovered a rectangular patch of darker soil, an apparent soil discoloration marking an ancient foundation trench. You kneel at the trench's edge, brushing aside loose silt to expose compacted clay boundaries. This might have been the edge of a stilt house or a small ritual pavilion, its wooden posts lost to decay but hinted at by post-hole stains. You press your palm into one post-hole imprint, feeling the subtle ring of firm clay beneath the muddy slurry. It's a ghost of a structure, a space once alive with ceremony and daily life. As afternoon shadows lengthen, you catch sight of another tiny glint near the trench's corner. This find, an intact jade bead, would once have adorned a necklace. Obscure ethnographic parallels hint that such beads were passed from mother to daughter, symbols of lineage continuity. You place the bead in a small pottery bowl lined with damp cloth, its pale green surface glowing in warm daylight. This morsel of beauty bridges domestic intimacy and grand ceremonial expression. Nearby, a geologist takes sediment core samples to establish layering sequence. You watch as he drills a thin metal tube into the wet soil, extracting a cylinder of alternating dark organic layers and sandy silt. These core samples confirm two major deposition events, one around 2450 BCE and another around 2300 BCE, timelines that align with documented monsoon intensifications. Historians are still debating the relative impact of climate change versus social factors in Liangzhu's decline, but each core slice adds a piece to the puzzle. By late afternoon, the field yields dozens of jade fragments. You pause to count the finds, each one a fragment of a larger artifact, each slab and chip once part of a city of jade. The thrill of discovery pulses through you, a quiet exhilaration that hums beneath the setting sun. Farmers lean on timber handles, tired limbs submerged in cooling water, eyes bright with satisfaction at having unveiled a hidden world beneath their fields. As the team begins to pack up, you stand at the grid's edge, gazing across the gleaming paddies now dotted with excavation tools. Dr. Lin finishes cataloging finds and whispers, "This is just the beginning." Indeed, today's small revelations hint at a sprawling city buried under meters of silt, a jade metropolis waiting to speak. Historians will pore over these fragments, debating interpretations for decades to come. You join the farmers on the muddy path back to their village, one of them offering you a rough wooden bowl of rice porridge studded with tender water chestnuts. You eat slowly, feeling a kinship with both the land and its ancient inhabitants. Around you, lanterns begin to flicker as dusk falls, guiding your steps along the raised causeway. In the deepening twilight, you hold a fragment of jade to the sky, its soft glow matching the first stars. Tonight, when you lie down on a simple reed mat, you'll dream of silt layers peeled back like pages of a book, each fragment a whisper from Liangzhu's past. You'll feel the hush of excavation trenches and the soft click of jade against a ceramic bowl. And as sleep carries you away, you'll carry with you the thrill of knowing that beneath the rice fields, an entire world of mud, water, and stone lies waiting to be told. You step gingerly into the sunlit excavation trench, the morning air crisp against your skin. Around you, archaeologists crouch with trowels and brushes, their movements precise and deliberate as they coax treasures from the stubborn clay. The trench walls rise in neat stratified bands, silt over clay over sandy flood deposits, each layer whispering a chapter of Liangzhu's buried story. Above, a protective canopy of canvas filters the sunlight, turning everything beneath it into a muted gold. You adjust your wide-brimmed hat, ready to join the dig team in revealing the unearthed treasures, long hidden beneath Yangtze sediments. Kneeling beside the lead excavator, you watch as she carefully removes a thin sliver of topsoil to reveal the rim of a green-glazed pottery jar. Mainstream typological analysis dates such vessels to Liangzhu's middle phase, around 2800 BCE, used for storing rice wine in ceremonial contexts. You gently trace the jar's curved lip with a damp brush, revealing tiny incised motifs, parallel lines that echo the ripples of nearby canals. A subtle grin tugs at your lips. Even in broken fragments, the artistry of Liangzhu potters shines through like firelight on water. Nearby, a team member taps at a colander-like sieve to wash away loosened dirt. Each pass uncovers minuscule jade chips no larger than your fingernail. Rather than discard them, you scoop them into a small pottery dish. Specialists will later analyze the chips to reconstruct the shapes of once whole cong and by pieces. This microarchaeological approach is a mainstream practice now, yet it builds on an obscure 1970s experiment that first proposed using digital modeling to reassemble jade splinters, an idea historians are still debating in terms of reconstruction accuracy. Your eyes lift to a partially exposed wooden trough set into the trench floor. It once formed part of a ritual platform's drainage, an ingenious feature that channeled libation liquids away from sacred altars. You pause to marvel at how Liangzhu engineers embedded wood so precisely that it survived buried for 5 millennia. Fringe studies suggest the trough's timber came from dawn redwood groves upriver, a theory based on rare pollen traces found in the surrounding sediments. Most archaeologists remain skeptical, pointing instead to local water-tolerant species like Chinese swamp cypress. Historians are still debating this question, and you tuck away both possibilities as you resume brushing away mud. At the trench's far corner, a half-buried jade cong peeks from its earthen nest. You approach on tiptoe, heart racing. The stone's soft luster catches sunlight filtering through the canopy, revealing a carved face mask that seems to stare directly at you. You kneel, gently excavating around its edges with a fine brush, chuckling at the absurd thought that the stoic visage has watched floods and silts pile up above it, only to greet you now. Mainstream records show that cong masks combine human and mythical elements, possibly symbolizing protective deities. Yet, an obscure hypothesis suggests the masks represent cosmological diagrams, encoding directions and seasons. Historians are still debating this question, and here you stand amid the earth that preserves both ritual and mystery. Nearby, you spot a shattered by disc, the perfect circle broken into 3 flat shards. You pick up one shard, noting its smooth surface and concentric grooves. With care, you fit the pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle on the adobe floor, momentarily transforming fragments back into a disc. The completed circle seems to hover, reminding you of the moon's halo glimmering over flooded fields at night. You can almost hear the hum of nocturnal insects and the soft chant of priests confessing to river spirits. It's a fleeting tableau that dissolves as you set the shards aside, but the sense of wonder lingers. You rise and circle a shallow pit where dozens of small ceramic bowls rest on packed earth. Each holds remnants of charcoal flecks and burnt grain, evidence of offerings smeared with rice paste and set before altars. Mainstream ceramic residue analysis confirms traces of millet and rice husks, suggesting mixed-grain rituals disconnected from everyday meals. Yet an obscure chemist's report from a little-known journal found traces of wild herbs, perhaps mugwort or chrysanthemum, blended into the paste for aromatic purification. This fringe detail offers a sensory dimension to interpretation, though scholars are still debating the prevalence of botanical fumigation in Liangzhu rites. You glimpse a wooden post fragment encrusted in mud, its base carved into a stylized cloud motif. You prowl closer, brush in hand, to reveal the motif's crisp curls. Such posts likely formed part of a ceremonial pavilion wall, lending shade and sanctity to ritual gatherings. A mainstream view holds that these pavilions served elite assemblies, but another theory proposes they housed communal councils of elders. Historians are still debating this question, torn between political and social interpretations. You lean against a neighboring stake, imagining the hushed deliberations of leaders who once debated flood defenses and feast schedules here. Just beyond, a translucent jade scepter sits half-exposed on a reed mat laid for display. You approach reverently, fingertips tingling as you lift it. The scepter's handle narrows into a flared head carved with interlocking arcs, a design mainstream scholars link to thunder motifs. Yet an obscure article suggests the shapes mimic the rippled surface of standing water, evidence of ritual acts aimed at controlling floods. Historians are still debating this question, and you feel the scepter's cool heft convey both power and uncertainty. A sudden clatter draws your attention to a nearby workbench where assistants sort through a pile of bone tools. Awls, needles, and comb-like implements with finely spaced teeth. You pick up a needle made from deer bone, its eye still threaded with faded linen fiber. It's an intimate artifact, once used to sew reed mats or repair leather, now poised between utility and elegance. Mainstream zooarchaeological reports confirm widespread use of bone-sewing tools in Liangzhu households. But an obscure find from a remote site discovered a comb tool with stylized tiger motifs, sparking debate over whether such items served practical or symbolic functions. Historians are still debating this question, and you tuck the comb aside for later examination. Dust motes dance in the golden shafts of sunlight slanting through the canopy as you head to a newly opened test pit. There, team members reveal a rectangular cache lined with woven reed mat impressions set into fine silt. Within lie clusters of small green jade pellets. Soil samples show they slipped through cracks in pouches once hung from belts. These pellets might have functioned as fertility tokens or magical charms, a theory drawn from obscure ethnographic parallels among later rice-cultivating cultures. Some mainstream scholars caution against directly linking Neolithic pouches to much later traditions. Historians are still debating this question, and here you stand amid tokens of both daily life and transcendent belief. You wander to the trench's center, where a circular stone altar emerges, its edge polished smooth by centuries underground. Carved along its rim are 24 shallow notches. Mainstream interpretations label them as lunar month markers, evidence of early calendrical knowledge. Conversely, an obscure study posits they marked agricultural tasks planned across a seasonal cycle, a proto-farmer's planner rather than an astronomical device. Historians are still debating this question, and you run your fingers lightly along one notch, feeling the continuum of human time etched in stone. At midday, lunch arrives in bamboo steamers, steamed dumplings of sticky rice and river shrimp, generously shared beneath the shade of a nearby trellis. You savor each bite, murmuring thanks to the cooks whose skills mirror ancient culinary ingenuity. As you eat, you watch colleagues map the trench's features on parchment, drawing neat lines and shading to record every nook and groove. The precision of their drawings recalls master mapmakers who first laid out Liangzhu's canals and platforms. Sediment cores taken at grid intersections await analysis, promising to refine flood chronologies. You swallow a dumpling and wipe your mouth, impressed by how modern methods and ancient actions intertwine in this muddy forum. Refreshed, you rejoin the excavation. Just outside the trench, a cluster of shattered sandstone grinders lies in a shallow depression. The grinder's surfaces bear concave where patterns from processing pigments. Mainstream pigment analysis has identified traces of red ochre and black manganese, used in painting pottery or body adornment. Yet an obscure mineralogical survey detected tiny flecks of gold dust on one grinder's rim, leading to wild speculation about early metalworking in Liangzhu. Most experts dismiss it as contamination, but historians are still debating this question. You pick up a grinder, noting its heft and smooth interior, a blunt instrument of primal artistry. Your attention shifts to a long ridge where a series of evenly spaced post holes emerges. You recall that these post holes likely formed the framework of a timber walkway linking two ritual precincts. Mainstream reconstructions show elevated walkways connecting platforms, facilitating processional routes during festivals. You step into a vast bamboo pavilion erected beside the main excavation trench, its roof panels filtering the high sun into gentle patterns on the packed earth floor. Around you, a half-circle of low wooden stools supports a dozen scholars hunched over tables strewn with maps, pottery shards, and jade fragments. The air trembles with animated debate, punctuated by the soft click of calipers measuring artifact dimensions and the distant hum of cicadas beyond canvas walls. Here, amidst the flutter of research papers and the scent of ink, you encounter the beating heart of academic debates. You drift toward a group clustered over a life-size plan of the central platform, tracing lines drawn by surveyors. One scholar points to the concentric embankments radiating outward, proclaiming confidently that these walls prove Liangzhu society was a centralized theocratic state, organized under a priestly elite. This mainstream view finds support in the uniformity of hydraulic works and ritual terraces dated to 3000 BCE, suggesting coordinated labor forces. Yet another expert furrows her brow and counters that similarities in embankment design might instead reflect shared cultural norms across autonomous villages, not necessarily a single ruling authority. Historians are still debating this question. You drift to a separate cluster where a junior researcher unrolls photographs of incised marks on pottery rims. He argues these marks constitute an early form of proto-writing, possibly a clan identification system. Mainstream caution, however, holds that such incisions resemble potter's marks seen in many Neolithic cultures, used simply to guide the potter's hand as the vessel dried. We lack continuous sign sequences, insists a seasoned epigrapher, tapping the image. Yet a fringe hypothesis suggests that when read sequentially, some symbols echo abstract forms later found in Shang oracle bones, an intriguing but unproven link. Historians are still debating this question. Moving on, you find a heated exchange over jade distribution patterns. One scholar holds up a scatter plot showing the torso lengths of jade cong found in high-status burials versus common graves. Clearly a hierarchical society, she asserts, citing grave goods analysis indicating unequal access to precious jade objects. Across the table, another expert retorts that differential burial assemblages might instead reflect regional workshops with varying access to jade, rather than centralized elite consumption. Trade wins, not power wins, he quips, eyes dancing. Historians are still debating this question. You drift past a table where two geomorphologists compare sediment core charts. One insists that rapid silt layers around 2450 BCE signify a catastrophic flood that triggered Liangzhu's decline, the so-called flood hypothesis. Mainstream researchers largely accept this timeline, supported by C14 dates on flood deposits. Yet another voice floats up, warning that climate proxies could misinterpret long-term monsoon variability, recommending caution against overemphasizing a single climatic event. Social resilience matters as much as rain gauges, she says. Historians are still debating this question. Beyond the podium, you notice a small display of unusual artifacts. Carved fish vertebra hairpins and tiny reed filament filters that resemble minuscule sieves. These odd pieces spark sidelong glances. Some suggest they were status markers for ritual dancers. Others propose they formed part of elaborate smoking pipes for burning scented resins. Obscure experimental archaeology projects have reconstructed one hairpin's decorative inlay using dragonfly wing fragments, an astonishing detail that hints at hybrid ornamentation. Historians are still debating this question. At a low bench you glimpse a brittle clay tablet fragment covered in angular symbols. A young archaeologist treats it as potential evidence of a written record, a tantalizing idea given Liangzhu's claimed status as an early state. Mainstream caution counters that no complete tablet exists. Most scholars attribute the inscriptions to potters' kiln marks or ritual graffiti. Yet a provocative paper published last year argued these symbols form a rudimentary calendrical notation, possibly tracking moon phases. Historians are still debating this question. You wander toward a corner where bioarchaeologists examine skeletal remains from a high-status tomb. One researcher points to cranial measurements suggesting a genetically distinct subgroup, perhaps migrants from south of the Yangtze. Mainstream genetic surveys, however, find no clear evidence for large-scale migration, favoring in-situ cultural evolution. Our haplogroup sample remains too small, he concedes. A fringe claim persists that certain burial rituals indicate foreign elite imposition, but most scholars dismiss it for lack of contextual data. Historians are still debating this question. Turning, you hear talk of hydraulic engineering models. Some propose Liangzhu's canals formed a centralized irrigation network under state control. Mainstream irrigation theory, though, maintains that independent villages cooperated seasonally, each maintaining its own canals. A radical new simulation using agent-based modeling suggests both could be true, state-sponsored maintenance alongside local autonomy. A hybrid model. Historians are still debating this question. In a quieter alcove, a lone researcher shows you microscopic residue analyses on pottery interiors. She points to pollen traces of chrysanthemum, mugwort, and frankincense, exotic imports suggesting ritual fumigation. This fringe detail draws skeptical glances. Mainstream ceramics experts warn of contamination from modern air filters. We need more samples to confirm, she admits, offering you a pipette for a closer look. Historians are still debating this question. Nearby, a fractious discussion centers on funerary architecture. One presenter argues that multi-chambered tombs signal clan-based social stratification, citing spatial analysis of tomb layouts. Yet his colleague counters that burial chambers might reflect family lineage divisions within a communal structure, not hierarchical classes. Interpretation shapes reality, she murmurs. Mainstream studies note divergent tomb forms across the site but caution against equating complexity with rank. Historians are still debating this question. You drift past a knot of researchers studying charcoal from platform remnants. One posits that scorched timbers indicate ritual burnings, part of purification ceremonies atop the celestial platform. Mainstream archaeology typically attributes burns to accidental fires or construction methods, like smoking wood to harden it. A fringe hypothesis proposes sacrificial conflagrations to appease water deities, citing parallels in later Chinese legends. Historians are still debating this question. Near the tent's edge, you find a map of pottery styles color-coded by phase. One scholar shrugs and allows that typological boundaries blur, vinyl-like transitions defying clean phase divisions. Mainstream typology teaches clear phase chronology, from early chord-marked wares to late polished forms, but actual assemblages reveal overlapping styles. Art doesn't respect our neat categories, someone quips. Historians are still debating this question. In the soft afternoon light, you realize you've wandered through a microcosm of intellectual ferment. Each table, each map, each artifact summons a dozen voices weighing evidence, questioning assumptions, and nudging interpretations into new directions. The pavilion hums with polite contention, like competing water currents in a canal, tugging, converging, sometimes clashing. You settle onto a low stool near the exit as dusk cools the air. A seasoned professor taps a carved bone stylus on his notebook, summarizing, "We know Liangzhu thrived from 3300 to 2300 BCE, mastered jade carving and water control, and left monumental earthworks. Beyond that, much remains contested." He smiles wryly, eyes bright. You step through the low doorway of a reed-thatched structure perched on a raised earthen terrace, the air inside heavy with the lingering smoke of incense and the hush of hushed prayers. Flickering lamps cast dancing shadows on woven mats, forming a moving tapestry that seems to breathe with every slow syllable of ancient ritual. This is the heart of ritual's resonance, where every gesture, object, and breath becomes a bridge between the world you know and the realm just beyond perception. At the center of the space stands a low circular altar of polished sandstone, its surface marred by concentric grooves now soft with age. Two young acolytes kneel before it, arranging offerings. Small ceramic bowls of rice porridge flavored with crushed mugwort, bundles of river reeds tied with red hemp cords, and plates of freshwater snails layered like tiny spirals. You watch as they place each item with meticulous care, their fingers brushing the altar's edge in a gesture that echoes the turning of the cosmos itself. Mainstream studies of Liangzhu ritual attest that offerings combine staples of daily life, rice, fish, wild grains, with aromatic plants, forging a sensory link between subsistence and supplication. A hush falls as the high priest enters, his robes woven with green and white hemp threads, the patterns embroidered to mimic swirling water. His jade scepter, topped with a stylized dragon motif, glints in the lamplight. He raises it in salute to the four cardinal directions, murmuring an invocation that rolls through the hall like distant thunder. You lean forward, straining to catch the words, fragments of an extinct dialect preserved in ritual memory. Historians are still debating whether these invocations formed a structured liturgy passed down through formal training, or whether priests improvised incantations guided by ancestral spirit voices. As the priest intones, you notice a line of small carved wooden figurines arrayed on a narrow shelf above the altar. Each figurine wears a mask-like face similar to those etched on jade songs, an uncanny parallel suggesting that these wooden idols served as proxies for the gods themselves. Obscure ethnographic parallels from later Jiangnan folk traditions describe similar figurines as vessels for spirit migration during seasonal rites, though no direct textual evidence confirms such continuity. The debate swirls. Were these figurines simply decorative, mnemonic aids for recitation, or living avatars summoned to inhabit the wooden forms? Historians are still debating this question. You rise and step closer to the altar, drawn by the rhythmic thrum of a conch shell trumpet sounding from the doorway. A group of masked musicians enters, each carrying ritual instruments. Bone flutes carved from crane wing bones, small bronze bells that chime in complex polyrhythms, and clay drums painted with wave-like motifs. Their melody is unlike any you've heard, a layered chant that harmonizes with the priest's voice, weaving a sonic net that seems to capture each bead of incense smoke. Mainstream acoustic analyses suggest that Liangzhu temples were designed to amplify low-frequency sounds, creating a reverberation that heightened trance states. Suddenly, the drums stop, and the conch trumpet blows three long, keening notes. The acolytes step forward, kneeling to sprinkle handfuls of crushed lotus petals onto the altar. The petals drift in slow spirals, settling atop the bowls of porridge in a delicate, perfumed mosaic. You inhale deeply, the floral scent mingling with the earthy aroma of incense and the faint tang of fish oil used in lamp fuel. Ritual specialists argue that this blend of scents formed an olfactory map guiding participants' emotions, balancing stimulation and calm. Yet another theory posits that scented offerings aim to attract benevolent spirits while repelling malevolent ones, an interpretation based on a handful of burial chamber scent vessel finds. Historians are still debating this question. The high priest gestures, and the musicians resume, this time with a more insistent bass drone from wooden slit drums. You feel the vibration through the floorboards, the sound reverberating in your chest. Two acolytes approach carrying shallow reed trays stacked with small jade by discs and miniature cong tubes. Each disc glints like a droplet of water frozen in glass, each cong etched with mask faces staring outward. The acolytes place the jade in a tight circle around the altar's base, forming a ring that catches the lamplight in shifting crescendos. Mainstream interpretations view these jade circles as cosmic mirrors reflecting the heavens, yet a fringe hypothesis suggests they formed a protective barrier to trap wandering spirits. A theory based on rare boundary deposit finds beneath similar platforms. Historians are still debating this question. You notice that the mud walls of the shrine bear faint pigment traces, horizontal bands of red ochre alternating with white clay stripes. The colors align with the CSL, ceremonial stratigraphy layers, model proposed by some archaeologists. indicating distinct ritual phases marked by alternating earthwork coatings. Yet skeptics argue that the paint layers result from periodic maintenance or aesthetic refurbishing rather than symbolic layering. The dispute turns on microscopic pigment analysis. Some studies find traces of cinnabar, a toxic mercury ore, hinting at symbolic blood references. Others detect only clay and hematite. Historians are still debating this question. As the ceremony builds toward its climax, the acolytes bring forth a large ceramic vessel filled with rice wine infused with wild mint and chrysanthemum petals. The priest pours libations onto the altar in a slow, circular flow, letting the wine pool in the grooves and then drain through hidden channels into a subterranean cistern beneath the terrace. You step back in awe. This hydraulic feature served both practical drainage and symbolic offering, linking heaven and earth through liquid motion. Mainstream scholarship recognizes Liangzhu's integration of water management and ritual architecture. Yet another perspective holds that the cistern's primary function was mundane, rainwater harvesting repurposed for ceremonial display. Historians are still debating this question. The priest raises a jade scepter in each hand, bringing them together above his head before striking them like cymbals. The jade rings out a clear, bell-like tone that sends ripples through the assembled crowd. You feel an electric tingle, as if the air itself has been struck. A hush follows the final ring, a moment of collective breath held in stillness. It's the pivot of the ritual, a purifying resonance meant to align minds and hearts with cosmic order. Obscure acoustic experiments on replicated jade songs in modern labs show that their resonance peaks at frequencies close to human alpha brainwaves, suggesting an intentional creation of meditative states. Historians are still debating this question. From a side alcove, a line of worshippers approaches to place their own token offerings. Small reed baskets of snails, fish hooks, and polished river pebbles. Each steps forward, kneels, and whispers a prayer before laying down the token and withdrawing. You observe that some offerings bear personal inscriptions, tiny carved notches indicating family names or prayer counts. A graffiti-like personalization seldom recorded in excavation reports. This practice points to individual devotion within communal rites, underscoring the multidimensional nature of Liangzhu spirituality. As the final worshipper departs, the priest intones a closing benediction, his voice dropping to a resonant hum. The musicians join in, layering chants that echo off the reed walls, inviting the gods to journey with the offerings. You close your eyes, letting the combined sights, sounds, and scents wash over you in a wave of sacred immersion. It's as though you stand at a threshold between two worlds, feeling the pulsing lifeblood of a culture that wove practicality and playfulness, function and faith into every gesture. When the final note fades, the crowd rises silently and files out, leaving the altar space empty except for the lingering glow of embers and the soft rustle of discarded baskets. You step forward, brushing away a few petals to inspect the jade circle, a testament to the ceremony's ephemeral power and the enduring whispers it leaves behind in the mud and stone. Mainstream reports will catalog the ritual architecture and artifact deposits. Scholarly papers will argue over symbolic meanings and hydraulic functions. Historians are still debating this question. You pause in the cool evening air outside the shrine, inhaling the scent of lotus and ash. Lanterns hung from bamboo poles illuminate the terrace, casting lattice-patterned shadows across the ground. In that chiaroscuro, you feel the afterimage of ritual resonance, a stillness charged with resonance. As you follow the narrow walkway back towards stilted houses and distant lantern lights, you carry with you a sense that ceremony is not merely performance but a living language that echoes through time, shaping how people connect, remember, and hope. You return to the low-lying terraces at dawn, the mist still clinging to the abandoned canals like reluctant ghosts. Here, where grand platforms once stood proud against the marsh, only fractured earthen ridges and scattered post holes remain. The great inundation has receded, leaving shallow pools that reflect a broken sky. You step carefully over muddy depressions that once formed house floors, now half filled with silt and reed detritus. In this hushed light, you realize you are walking through the aftermath of a civilization's final breath. Villagers from a nearby settlement move among the ruins, clad in simple hemp tunics and carrying woven baskets. Their curiosity is gentle, their hands familiar with the marsh's rhythms. You watch as a middle-aged woman kneels beside a sloping embankment, brushing fingers through silt to reveal a glint of pale green. She lifts a broken jade cong fragment, its carved mask face worn smooth by centuries underground, and cradles it as if it were a living relic. Mainstream archaeological accounts tell us that after the final flood around 2300 BCE, local communities salvaged jade scraps and reused them in new contexts, laying fragments in village shrines to maintain ancestral connections. Nearby, a group of youths gathers to dig shallow pits where collapsed wooden beams lie half exposed. They lift rotten timbers, searching for embedded mortise joints and decorative notches, evidence of stilt house construction techniques. One boy holds up a splintered stake with an incised spiral motif, tracing the pattern with his finger. Experts believe that such post-decorations served both structural and symbolic functions, linking architecture to water spirit iconography. Yet an obscure ethnographic observation recorded centuries later describes similar spirals as clan marks, used to claim lineage rights over marsh tracts. Historians are still debating this question. Were those spirals spiritual symbols or early emblems of social identity? You drift toward a collapsed longhouse foundation, now a tangle of silt-covered rafters and reed thatch. A village elder stands sentinel at its edge, holding a small clay bowl filled with water and shell fragments. She explains that her grandmother once lived here, recalling stories passed down of nightly chants to ward off lingering spirits. According to mainstream anthropological reconstructions, the Liangzhu collapse led survivors to ritualize ruin, embedding personal offerings in debris to appease unsettled ancestors. Yet a fringe theory posits that these offerings formed part of clandestine ceremonies marking the end of a sacred city, a final rite sealing off a hallowed precinct. Historians are still debating this question. As the sun climbs, you follow a narrow causeway toward the heart of the former metropolis. Along its flanks, small clusters of villagers sort through heaps of broken pottery. They examine each sherd for painted motifs, zigzag lines, fish scales, and mask faces, and separate them into piles. These pottery fragments once bore rice wine, porridge, and salted fish at communal feasts. Mainstream residue analyses confirm traces of millet beer in certain jars, reinforcing the importance of shared libations in Liangzhu society. Yet some local elders recall an obscure song about wine of farewell, hinting that the last harvest festival may have doubled as a vigil for the city's fate. Historians are still debating this question. You pause beside a half-buried earthen terrace where children are at play. They pack mud into hollowed gourds to fashion miniatures of stilt house poles, imitating their parents' labor. Beneath these playthings lie fragments of bone awls and sewing needles, tools repurposed from house fittings to form toys. Archaeologists have noted that child-made artifacts appear in post-collapse layers, suggesting that everyday implements found new life in imaginative play. This quirky adaptation underscores how communities rebounded through creativity even as formal structures crumbled. A sudden clatter draws your attention to a clearing where 4 men hoist a long wooden beam from the muck. Its end bears deep mortise cuts and a faint trace of red ochre. You kneel to inspect the joint, 2 parallel slots that once locked into a platform's crossbeam system. Mainstream structural analyses identify this as part of a ceremonial walkway connecting 2 sacrificial platforms. However, an obscure interpretation argues the same beam served later as a bridge in temporary refugee camps built atop ruined foundations. Historians are still debating this question. Was this beam originally sacred or salvaged for urgent shelter? Walking further, you find a shallow water basin, once a ritual libation pit, now choked with reeds. Villagers are fishing small carp and shrimp from its murky depths. You step in and feel the soft mud give way around your ankles, the basin's former edges marked by dark organic seams. According to mainstream environmental reconstructions, these pits formed part of ceremonial waterworks that drained offerings into underground channels. An obscure local tale, barely recorded in official annals, speaks of rain spirits inhabiting these pits after the city's fall, granting bounty to those who dared fish its waters. Historians are still debating this question. You come upon a collapsed shrine, a half-submerged stone slab etched with concentric rings and shallow depressions. Around it, Villagers have arranged personal tokens, broken jade beads, bone toggles, and handfuls of crushed seashells. Each offering reflects a gesture of remembrance, a plea for protection in the uncertain world beyond Liangzhu's core. Mainstream ritual studies emphasize post-collapse offerings as acts of communal mourning, helping survivors process loss. Yet another interpretation proposes these tokens formed a new ritual grammar, blending ancestral rites with emergent folk practices. Historians are still debating this question. Beyond the shrine, you notice the faint outline of an old canal, now reduced to a shallow depression filled with water lilies. Fishermen set basket traps here, retrieving eels and small carp. They speak of canal spirits, guiding the fish into their nets, rituals whispered at dawn before hauling in the catch. Mainstream zooarchaeology confirms continuity of fish-trapping techniques from Liangzhu to later Bronze Age cultures. Yet an obscure folk legend credits the canal's ghosts with singing lullabies that lull fish into slumber, an evocative image that remains in local memory but eludes archaeological proof. Historians are still debating this question. The midday sun beats down as you climb a gentle rise where a line of buried post holes arcs across the landscape. A team of villagers uses wooden stakes to mark out a new communal hall, constructed from salvaged beams and repurposed thatch. They explain that they built it atop the old platform to honor their ancestors and to serve as a gathering place for festivals celebrating harvests and pilgrimages to Liangzhu's remains. Mainstream ethnographic parallels describe similar spirit halls, erected by descendant communities to maintain ties to prehistoric sites. Yet some scholars caution against seeing these as direct cultural continuities, suggesting economic motives often underlie such reconstructions. Historians are still debating this question. You pause to catch your breath, leaning on a beam carved with faint mask impressions. The carved face stares back at you through flaked ochre residue, a silent witness to both ritual grandeur and humble reinvention. In its empty eye sockets you see layers of history: creation, abandonment, salvage, and remembrance. Further on, you come to a cluster of small earthen mounds where skeletal remains occasionally protrude through thin soil. Graves were dug here long after the city's fall, simple interments without jade or pottery, yet marked by reed crosses. Villagers tell you these are refugee graves, where displaced families laid their dead after storms tore through makeshift shelters. Mainstream osteological studies find signs of arthritis and healed wounds in these skeletons, evidence of hard labor and disease. Yet an obscure medical text fragment suggests that some survivors attempted herbal treatments using local reeds and lotus leaves to cure skin ailments, an early form of folk medicine. Historians are still debating this question. As afternoon fades, you wander back toward the central rise, where a solitary fisherman stands knee-deep in silt-laced water. He holds a broken jade mask fragment from its zone, polishing it against his palm until it glows like wet moss. "My great-grandfather found this," he says softly. He said the spirits spoke through its eyes. You feel a chill, aware that these ruins are more than stone and earth. They are living memory, carried forward in everyday acts of devotion. You pause on the path, looking back at the half-ruined terraces and scattered pools. The settlement's bones rest here. Jigsawed jade fragments, splintered beams, and terraced banks half-swallowed by time. In their ruins, you see resilience. How villagers transformed collapse into renewal, forging new rituals and livelihoods from the remnants of a city once lost beneath the Yangtze's silt. As dusk settles, lanterns hang from newly built posts around the spirit hall. Families gather to share food: steamed rice cakes, salted fish, and fresh water chestnuts, offered to both living and departed. You join them. You stand ankle-deep in a shallow lagoon where ripples spread outward in perfect concentric circles, each ring tracing a moment in time long since past. The water here is crystal clear, giving you a view of the lagoon floor, a tapestry of mottled clay, angular pebbles, and occasional shards of pottery glinting like memories in the sun. Beneath your toes, the sediment feels layered, each stratum recording a chapter of Liangzhu's ancient story. In this place of quiet revelation, you uncover Sediments' secrets. As you wade further in, your fingers drift through the soft clay, picking up a handful that slides easily through your grasp. Mainstream geological studies show that the Yangtze's floodwaters carried alternating pulses of coarse sand and fine silt, creating rhythmic layering that archaeologists use to date flood events. These layers serve as a natural chronicle. Coarse layers signal high-energy floods, while thin silted sheets mark the quiet lull of seasons between storms. You picture each flood crest rolling downriver, the weight of water pressing city platforms under a cloak of sediment. You bend down to examine a distinct band of darker, organic-rich mud just below the surface layer. It smells faintly of decayed reeds and waterlogged leaves, traces of marsh plants that once thrived here. Obscure palynological surveys have identified pollen grains of water chestnut and cattail in this band, hinting at a wetter phase before the great inundations. You close your eyes, inhaling the earthy aroma, and imagine fields of chestnut blossoms lining the lagoon's edge, bees humming in the humidity as villagers harvested tubers for their winter stores. Suddenly, you slip and sink to your knees, thudding softly into thicker clay. When you push aside a screen of fine silt, you reveal a layer of tiny shells, minute valves of freshwater snail crushed long ago. Mainstream studies suggest that farmers mixed crushed shell into paddy soils to improve drainage and calcium content. Yet this same shell-rich layer also accelerated sediment compaction, creating denser deposits that sealed underlying strata. Historians are still debating whether this practice helped rice yields more than it complicated flood damage. Attention written in the mud beneath your palms. You rise, carrying a lump of mixed sediment to the embankment above. There, a team of geoscientists stands with split-core tubes and bagged samples. You offer your sample, and the lead researcher smiles in recognition. This dark band here? It marks a drought phase, a time when river levels fell and exposed the lagoon floor to airborne dust. Mainstream climate reconstructions correlate thinner, oxidized layers with decreased monsoon rains around 2500 BCE. A fringe interpretation, though, holds that slight cracks in those oxidized layers signal periodic earthquakes that briefly drained water before collapsing back. A hypothesis still under heated debate. Leaving the lagoon, you follow a narrow channel that cuts through a gentle slope. As you walk, you notice the exposed banks reveal a rainbow of hues. Pale yellows of clay, rusty reds where iron-rich sediments oxidized, and muted grays where water stagnated. Moss and lichen cling to the lower banks, softening the geology with living green. Obscure engineers once tested channel banks by tapping with stone mallets, listening for hollow sounds indicating weak zones. Though undocumented in most reports, a handful of local folk memories recall elders tapping mud walls to predict collapse, an early acoustic survey technique that scholars mention only in passing. You perch on a sediment bench overlooking the spillway where floodwaters once cascaded into the lagoon. Here, the sediment is thickest, over 2 meters in some cores, signaling a catastrophic deposition event. Mainstream radiocarbon dates place that great burial around 2300 BCE, aligning with the final decline of Liangzhu culture. Yet another camp argues for multi-phase deposition over decades rather than a single cataclysm, pointing to subtle fissures between layers that hint at slow accumulation. Historians are still debating this question, torn between visions of rapid disaster and slow erosion. Your gaze drifts to the far bank, where a spiral of light catches your eye. You wade through knee-high water to investigate and find a perfectly preserved post hole. Its circular depression cut through layers of silt, each ring marking a distinct sediment pulse. Within the hole, fine-grained sediment filled the void after the wood decayed, preserving an invisible time capsule. Geoarchaeologists extracted similar post-hole cores to reconstruct the sequence of construction and abandonment, a mainstream approach now, but once considered too speculative when first proposed in the 1980s. You crouch to trace the concentric lines, feeling each layer's whisper of seasons and ceremonies. Behind you, reeds sway in the breeze, their roots anchoring a thin veneer of topsoil. Beneath that, older sediments tell of an even earlier lagoon flooding. Obscure sediment cores from neighboring embankments uncovered artifacts, simple pottery shards and bone tools, embedded deeper than Liangzhu's main layers, hinting at pre-Liangzhu occupation. Historians are still debating whether these represent a proto-Liangzhu phase or entirely separate cultures. As you stand between those layers, you feel the mingling of human hands stretching back far beyond recorded history. You continue upstream to a spot where many canals converge, a natural sediment trap. The canal walls here are stained red and ochre from iron-rich clay, and between them lies a labyrinth of narrow ridges created by shifting currents depositing alternating sand and silt. A researcher scoops a sample into a glass vial, explaining that they'll use laser granulometry to measure particle sizes, revealing flood intensity patterns over centuries. Fringe commentators worry that laser analysis overemphasizes certain particle fractions, skewing interpretations toward violent flood models. Historians are still debating this question, and you tuck that doubt into your mental archive. As midday sun warms the air, you rest on a broad sediment flat where broken conch shells cluster among paddy weeds. These shells appear only in certain layers, evidence of ritual deposits when families placed shell offerings in canals before they were buried. Mainstream ritual studies connect these deposits to water purification ceremonies described in Chapter 4. Yet some argue they were accidental losses from shellfish processing sites upriver, a mundane explanation that contests any spiritual reading. Historians are still debating this question. You follow a faint path along the lagoon's northern edge, where moss-covered stones hint at a forgotten landing. At each step, the sediment beneath squeaks softly, a sponge-like cushion that reminds you how waterlogged these deposits remain even after millennia. Obscure borehole logs show that anaerobic conditions here preserved organic fibers, twigs, seeds, and pollen in remarkable detail, creating an ecological snapshot of Liangzhu's wetlands. You imagine a palette of reeds, lotus, and marsh grasses weaving a living enclosure around the city. Ahead, a shallow depression filled with lilies betrays another sediment scoop site. Within its walls, you spot a small jar rim poking through the mud. You crouch and brush away silt to reveal thick-rimmed pottery decorated with fish scale motifs. Mainstream typology dates this to Liangzhu's late phase, perhaps cast aside during hurried abandonment. Yet, an obscure discovery of similar pottery buried under older flood layers suggests some vessels were intentionally interred before the final silt rush, a ritual of farewell rather than accident. Historians are still debating this question. Refreshed, you drift toward an overgrown embankment where the sediment profile narrows like a book's spine. You slice a shallow trench with your trowel to expose the layers. Cream silt over gray clay over brown grit. Each band hums with meaning. Flood, dry season, flood. Obscure writers once likened these layers to drum skins beaten by the monsoon, a poetic image largely absent from dry academic reports. You tap the exposed profile with your fingertips, listening for echoes of those climatic beats. You pause beside a cluster of reeds dancing in a breeze, their roots entangled in sediment layers. Here, you notice tiny flecks of charcoal scattered through one stratum. Mainstream analysis dates the charcoal to a known ritual fire described in Chapter 5, confirming tales of ceremonial burnings atop the celestial platform. Yet another interpretation posits that the fire was accidental, a cooking hearth that caught wind-blown embers. Historians are still debating this question. As the afternoon deepens, you reach a broad riverbank where the main Yangtze finally flows back into view. The river's current is strong here, carving new channels and depositing fresh sediment at its mouth. You kneel by the bank and scoop up a handful of wet sand, letting it run through your fingers. This same sand once journeyed hundreds of kilometers, carrying stories of mountains and shorelines before settling here. In its grains, you sense the pulse of the river's endless renewal, a cycle of building up and washing away that shaped Liangzhu's fragile metropolis. Standing at the water's edge, you reflect on the sediment's secrets. Layers of flood and drought, ritual and daily life, creation and demise. Each stratum is a page in a book written by earth and water. Waiting for careful reading, you find yourself standing on a gently sloping ridge at twilight, the last glow of sun dissolving into a lavender sky. Beneath your feet lies the vast plain where Liangzhu once soared, now a patchwork of rice paddies and marshland. As the wind stirs the tall reeds, you close your eyes and let your mind drift. That's how you begin dreaming the Jade City, summoning visions of the metropolis as it was in its glittering prime. In your dream, you step onto a broad earthen walkway lined with polished jade balustrades, each carved with mask faces whose eyes glint in torchlight. You trace a balustrade with a fingertip and feel the cool smoothness as if the stone still remembers the carver's touch. Mainstream archaeological parallels recover similar jade inlays set into wooden platforms, a rare fusion of architecture and art. Yet another interpretation suggests these inlays formed a talismanic border, warding off floods, an idea still debated among scholars. Historians are still debating this question. Ahead, you glimpse a grand avenue paved with flat stones, their surfaces gleaming under moonlight. Along its sides, stilted halls rise, their silhouettes punctuated by fluttering silk banners dyed in ochre and indigo. You hear faint chatter and laughter echoing down the corridor, as if the night itself hums with celebration. In your dream, you know this is a festival of jade, a rare gathering where carvers unveil new creations, a moment suspended between artistic revelation and communal joy. You drift through one open hall where artisans stand around low tables, crafting delicate cong tubes and discs by torchlight. Each craftsman dips a leather-wrapped bamboo drill into a bowl of crushed quartz, rotating it against a jade slab until dust blossoms like snowflakes. The scene feels both intimate and vast, 100 pairs of hands shaping eternity. An obscure ethnographic parallel suggests artisans hummed rhythmic chants to maintain steady pressure, a detail preserved only in rare workshop graffiti. Historians are still debating this question. Floating onward, your dream transports you across a canal lit by floating lotus lanterns. Each lantern bears a jade bead tied to its frame, the beads glowing like submerged stars. In this vision, the waterways themselves become luminous guides, turning the city into a constellation on Earth. Mainstream festival accounts reference water lantern rituals in Liangzhu's late phase, linking them to ancestral remembrance. Yet some argue these lanterns served as markers for flooded paths, a practical necessity transformed into ceremonial beauty. Historians are still debating this question. Suddenly, you stand atop the celestial platform, now crowned with a gleaming pavilion of teak and jade. A priestess in flowing robes raises a jade scepter toward the sky, calling upon constellations etched on celestial charts hung from wooden beams. The stars above shimmer and seem to pulse in response. In dream logic, you know this is an ancient rite realigning heaven and earth. Fringe theories propose that Liangzhu's priests possessed proto-astronomical instruments of polished bronze and jade, an astonishing claim still awaiting direct evidence. Historians are still debating this question. The pavilion's latticed windows frame the city's expanse, canals weaving like silver threads, platforms rising like islands, and distant reef-like jadescapes shimmering beneath a pale moon. You feel suspended between worlds, an observer and participant in a ritual of cosmic balance. The air tastes of crushed herbs, mugwort, chrysanthemum, and lotus petals, stirred by gentle breezes. These fragrances mingle with incense of sandalwood and frankincense, creating a heady bouquet said to open the mind to other realms. Historians are still debating the exact botanical recipes used. Below you, thousands gather in concentric circles of stilted terraces, their eyes lifted in shared awe. Each terrace bears a jade circle embedded into its center, reflecting the moon's glow. You step down into the crowd, feeling the hum of anticipation. A hush falls as the high priestess raises two jade discs, their polished surfaces catching starlight. She brings them together with a clear ring. The tone resonates through every heart, binding the community in a moment of sacred harmony. In that moment, the city pulses with life. Artisans dance with jade-tipped staffs, musicians play bone flutes and bronze bells, and dancers weave in serpentine patterns evoking river currents. Ghost-like shapes of water buffalo glimmer in distant paddies, their bells tinkling in time with the chorus of conch trumpets. Here, in your dream, architecture, ritual, and nature merge into a living mandala of light, sound, and stone. Your vision widens to reveal hidden alleys where children play among jade mosaics embedded in courtyard floors. They jump from tile to tile, their laughter echoing like chimes, chasing fireflies that dart through drifting incense smoke. In one courtyard, you glimpse a street vendor selling tiny jade bead earrings, each piece polished to a dew-like sheen. Patrons haggle in whispered tones, trading watercolor sketches of dragon motifs for strands of jade. Mainstream urban archaeology finds traces of such artisan quarters near the city's core. Yet a few scholars argue these spaces functioned as sacred precincts rather than commercial zones. Historians are still debating this question. You drift higher, above the rooftops, to a vantage where the entire metropolis stretches before you. The celestial platform shines like a beacon, its reflection mirrored in flooded paddies below. You notice miniature bronze mirrors set into thatched eaves, catching stray moonbeams and casting them back in dancing sparks. Fringe interpretations see these mirrors as tools for divination, scanning reflections for coastal omens. Mainstream consensus regards them as decorative elements imported through trade routes. Historians are still debating this question. A quiet hush descends as clouds drift across the moon, and you glimpse a solitary figure on the quay, an elder carrying a carved jade scepter aloft, leading an intimate procession of torchbearers. Their slow steps stir ripples in the water, tracing ephemeral calligraphy of light across the canal. In your dream, you sense they move toward a hidden sacred grove where an ancient banyan tree stands, its roots entwined with jade veins. You follow at a respectful distance, feeling the ground pulse beneath each vibrant beam of lantern glow. Arriving at the grove's fringe, you observe priests making offerings at the tree's trunk. Sprays of jasmine, small jade songs, and copper bells that ring with the forest's chant. The tree's massive limbs stretch overhead, weaving a living canopy that filters starlight into shifting patterns on the mossy floor. An obscure myth, recorded only in fragments, tells of this tree as the city's spirit guardian, its roots anchoring the jade heartbeat beneath the marsh. Historians are still debating this question. The final vision swells as you stand beneath the banyan. Thousands of lotus lanterns float upward, carried by skiffs past stilted houses and across mirrored canals. Their soft glow coalesces into a river of light that rises toward the heavens, blurring the line between water and sky. Drumbeats and flutes merge with conch horns in a grand crescendo that seems to cradle the world itself. Then, as dawn's first pale rays brush the horizon, the dream city begins to dissolve. Jade balustrades shimmer and vanish, lantern lights flicker out, and the stilted terraces recede into morning mist. You stand alone on the ridge once more, dewy air brushing your face as real birds call in the reeds below. In that quiet moment, you realize the vision lingers within you, a testament to a city lost but never forgotten. Now, as your eyelids grow heavy and the night's hush wraps softly around you, let the gentle echo of Liangzhu's jade heart guide you into sleep. Imagine the city's quiet canals under moonlight, the soft ripple of water carrying your dreams on its current. Each jade disc and vibrant lantern becomes a lullaby, a whisper in the dark that soothes your mind and spirit. Feel the ancient earth's steady pulse beneath you, its layered silt cradling every memory like a cradle's gentle sway. Breathe in the faint scent of lotus petals and incense, and let it calm your thoughts. Inhale slowly, 1, 2, 3, and exhale any lingering tension. Each breath becomes an arc of light, a connection between past and present, a bridge to peaceful slumber. The distant murmur of a conch trumpet fades into the night wind, leaving only the soft hum of your own heartbeat. You are drifting now, carried by dream waters to realms where time loosens its grip. Every ripple in the water, every glint of jade in moonbeams, guides you deeper into rest. Let the memory of stilted halls and star-aligned platforms settle around you like a soft quilt, warm and protective. The marsh's night chorus, frogs, cicadas, and whispering reeds, rocks you gently closer to that threshold between waking and dreaming. Sleep well, guided by the Jade City's silent promise that stories buried beneath earth and water can awaken in the heart, carrying you to peaceful shores. Good night, and may your dreams be as luminous